Once upon a time, in a land where legends were born and empires were forged, there lay a valley cradled by 7 hills. This valley, rich in promise and mystery, would become the cradle of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known, Rome. The story of Rome's foundation is a tale that pulses with passion, betrayal, and the indomitable spirit of its people. The origins of Rome are cloaked in myth and steeped in history. According to ancient legends, the tale begins with a humble shepherd named Mars, the god of war, who fell in love with Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin. Their union sparked a scandal that sent shockwaves through the realm of the gods and mortals alike. Rhea Silvia gave birth to twin boys, Romulus and Remus, but their fate was marred by jealousy and fear. The king, fearing a prophecy that foretold the twins would overthrow him, ordered them to be cast into the Tiber River. As the river surged and flowed, it became a cradle for the abandoned infants. Their cries echoed against the banks, calling out for survival. Miraculously, a she-wolf, drawn by their cries, found them and took them to her den, nurturing and protecting them as if they were her own. The warmth of her fur and the rhythm of her heartbeat became their sanctuary in a world that had turned its back on them. Together, they grew strong and defiant, their bond forged in the fires of adversity. As the boys grew, so did their sense of purpose. They dreamed of a city, a place where people could live free from tyranny, where justice would reign. But their dreams were as bright as they were dangerous. In a passionate moment, Romulus and Remus decided to found a new city. Standing on the Palatine Hill, Romulus marked the boundaries with a plow, a ritual that spoke of both creation and separation. But in an unexpected twist, a quarrel erupted between the brothers. In a tragic clash fueled by ambition and pride, Romulus, in a moment of rage, took the life of Remus. This heart-wrenching act cast a shadow over the birth of Rome. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Romulus stood alone on the Palatine Hill, burdened by guilt yet determined to honor his brother's memory. He called the new city Rome, a name that would resonate through the ages. It was a city born from sorrow, yet it pulsed with the promise of greatness. In those early days, Rome was not the grand metropolis we imagine today. It was a collection of huts made of mud and straw, where families huddled together under the vast sky, sharing stories of their hopes and fears. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, and the sounds of laughter mingled with the cries of children playing in the dirt. Every day was a struggle for survival, yet there was an undeniable spirit that thrived in the heart of the people. The early Romans were fierce warriors, farmers, and builders. They lived in a time when every man and woman was a part of something bigger than themselves. The lessons of their founders echoed in their lives: loyalty, bravery, and the unyielding will to protect their home. They fought to defend their land, standing shoulder to shoulder against invaders who threatened their fragile peace. As Rome grew, it began to attract people from surrounding regions. Refugees fled from wars, and traders brought goods and stories from far-off lands. Each new arrival added a brushstroke to the vibrant tapestry of Roman life. The city became a melting pot of cultures, where languages intertwined and traditions blended. Together, they forged a community built on the ideals of strength and unity. In this world of rapid change, the role of the monarchy began to take shape. The kings who ruled were not just leaders, they were seen as the very embodiment of Rome itself. Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome, was a wise and just ruler, known for bringing peace and stability. He taught the Romans about the gods, introducing them to rituals that connected their daily lives to the divine. Under his guidance, temples rose and festivals blossomed, filling the streets with color and joy. Yet, even amidst the celebration, shadows lingered. The monarchy, with its promise of protection, sometimes turned into a cage. The stories of kings like Tarquin the Proud, a ruler who reveled in his power and arrogance, spread like wildfire. His reign became a cautionary tale, filled with whispers of tyranny and oppression. People grew restless, their dreams of freedom stifled beneath the weight of a crown that no longer served them. As the tension brewed, the heart of Rome continued to beat fiercely. The values instilled by Romulus and the sacrifices made by Lucretia, a noblewoman whose fate would intertwine with the fate of Rome, began to echo in the hearts of the people. Stories of bravery and betrayal ignited the fires of rebellion. The desire for a republic, a government of the people, began to take root, nourished by the blood of those who had sacrificed everything for their beloved city. In the heart of this growing storm, the city of Rome stood proud yet vulnerable. The walls that sheltered its citizens whispered tales of love, loss, and hope. The streets were alive with the laughter of children, the clamor of trade, and the solemn prayers of those seeking favor from the gods. It was a place where dreams were born and destinies shaped, where every soul contributed to the spirit of what Rome would become. The foundation of Rome is a tale that transcends time. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of love and sacrifice, and the eternal struggle for justice. Each stone laid, each story shared, is a testament to the triumphs and tragedies that shaped a city destined for greatness. The journey of Rome began in a cradle of myths and a chorus of voices, echoing through the valleys and hills, forever marking its place in history. In the heart of ancient Rome, where the sun painted the horizon with shades of gold, a tumultuous tale unfolded, a story of power, betrayal, and the heavy price of ambition. The last kings of Rome were not just rulers, they were figures whose reigns would shape the destiny of a city and its people, leaving an indelible mark on history. Ancus Marcius, the fourth king of Rome, was a man of vision and strength. As the grandson of Numa Pompilius, he inherited a legacy of wisdom and justice. His rule was marked by a deep sense of duty toward his people. Ancus recognized that Rome was more than just a collection of huts and fields, it was a community that needed to grow and flourish. Under his guidance, the city expanded its borders, reaching out to neighboring tribes. He forged alliances and built new settlements, drawing in the weary and the wanderers who sought refuge in Rome's embrace. Ancus was also a builder. He turned his attention to the infrastructure of the city, creating the first bridge across the Tiber River, the Pons Sublicius, which connected Rome to the surrounding areas. This bridge became a lifeline for trade and communication, allowing goods to flow in and out of the city. With each stone laid, Ancus strengthened the bonds between the people, uniting them in a shared purpose. Yet, beneath his benevolent exterior lay a warrior's heart. He led his armies into battle, defending the city against invaders who sought to claim what was not theirs. His victories brought honor to Rome, but they also hinted at the dark undercurrents of power that would later engulf the monarchy. Following Ancus came Tarquin Priscus, a king whose name would resonate through the ages. He was not born a Roman but was a proud Etruscan, bringing with him the influence and traditions of his homeland. Tarquin Priscus was a charismatic leader, and his vision for Rome was grander than anyone had ever imagined. He saw the potential for greatness and sought to elevate Rome from its humble beginnings. His reign was marked by ambitious building projects, including the Circus Maximus, a grand arena where crowds would gather to witness chariot races and games. The excitement in the air was electric as people cheered for their favorite teams, united by the thrill of competition. Under Tarquin's rule, the city flourished, and the wealth of Rome grew. However, the more he built, the more he craved power. Tarquin Priscus became increasingly ruthless, using cunning and manipulation to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to his throne. He silenced dissent with an iron fist, and whispers of fear spread among the people. Tarquin Priscus's ambitions reached a peak when he sought to expand his influence beyond Rome. He dreamed of a powerful empire, but the seeds of his downfall were already sown. In a twist of fate, he was betrayed by those he trusted most. His own son, who once looked up to him, turned against him. The night was silent, but it was filled with treachery. Tarquin Priscus met his end not in battle, but in the hands of those he had once called allies. The crown passed to his son, Tarquin the Proud, a ruler whose very name struck fear into the hearts of many. Tarquin the Proud was a man of imposing stature and boundless ambition. He had inherited not just the throne but a kingdom on the brink of chaos. His desire for power knew no bounds, and he ruled with an iron grip, crushing any resistance without a second thought. He surrounded himself with sycophants who fed his ego, and soon, the once vibrant spirit of Rome began to dim. The people of Rome, who had once looked up to their kings with pride, now whispered tales of their despair. Tarquin the Proud's reign was marked by tyranny and excess. He was not a king of the people, he was a king who demanded absolute loyalty. Under his rule, the Senate was rendered powerless, its voices silenced. The cries of the citizens went unheard, drowned out by the sound of his extravagant banquets and lavish celebrations. Tarquin built a grand palace, the Temple of Jupiter, a monument to his own greatness, but it stood as a reminder of his disconnect from the very people he ruled. Amidst the opulence and arrogance, a shadow loomed. Tarquin the Proud's reign took a dark turn when he set his sights on Lucretia, a noblewoman known for her beauty and virtue. In a fateful encounter, he violated her, shattering her world and igniting a fire within the hearts of the Roman people. The betrayal was profound, not just to Lucretia, but to every Roman citizen who valued honor and integrity. Her tragic story would serve as the catalyst for a revolution, igniting the flames of rebellion that would consume the monarchy. In the aftermath of Lucretia's sorrow, despair turned to rage. Tarquin the Proud's grip on power weakened as the stories of his tyranny spread like wildfire. The city that had once embraced him now recoiled in horror. The Romans began to rally, their hearts united against the king who had betrayed them all. They spoke of justice, of honor, and of the price of freedom. A wave of resistance surged through the streets, fueled by the memory of a woman whose strength would inspire a nation. The last kings of Rome ruled during a time of grandeur and devastation, of dreams built and dreams shattered. Each king left behind a legacy, but it was Tarquin the Proud who ignited the revolution that would forever change the course of history. The whispers of betrayal echoed through the hills, and the city once cradled in the arms of monarchy began to rise against its oppressor. The journey toward freedom had begun, and with it came the promise of a new dawn for the people of Rome, a dawn that would see the birth of a republic built on the ashes of tyranny. In the bustling streets of ancient Rome, where the sounds of laughter mingled with the clatter of carts and the chatter of traders, there existed a powerful yet often overlooked force, the women of Rome. Their stories, woven into the very fabric of society, echoed through the halls of history, revealing a depth of strength, resilience, and influence that shaped the world around them. Women in early Rome held a complex position, bound by societal expectations, but also empowered by their roles within the family and community. They were not mere shadows of their fathers and husbands, they were the backbone of Roman society, their contributions vital yet often hidden from the annals of history. Within the walls of their homes, they were the nurturers and educators, molding the minds of future leaders and warriors. The ideal Roman woman was expected to embody virtues such as loyalty, modesty, and piety. She was a caretaker, a devoted wife, and a mother whose influence extended far beyond the confines of her household. In a world dominated by men, women were revered for their ability to maintain the household and uphold family honor. Marriages were often arranged for political alliances, and a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children and manage the family estate. Each birth was celebrated, a promise of the future and a hope for the continuation of family legacy. Yet, beneath this facade of traditional roles, women wielded an influence that often went unrecognized. They managed estates, made financial decisions, and sometimes even took charge of family businesses. Wealthy women could own property, and their financial acumen was respected, allowing them to contribute to their family's legacy and the prosperity of Rome. The stories of women like Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi brothers, exemplify this power. Cornelia was not just a mother, she was a wise counselor and an advocate for her sons, nurturing their ambitions while embodying the virtues of Roman womanhood. Her strength and intelligence were legendary, a testament to the influence women could wield in a patriarchal society. As the sun rose over the city, women gathered in public spaces, their voices blending with the rhythm of daily life. The marketplaces buzzed with energy, filled with the sense of fresh bread and ripe fruits. Women participated in trade, selling goods, and negotiating prices. They were the lifeblood of commerce, their presence essential in the bustling economy of Rome. In these vibrant interactions, they forged connections, creating networks that strengthened their communities and enriched their lives. Women also played a significant role in religious practices, serving as priestesses and participating in rituals that honored the gods. They were seen as keepers of tradition, entrusted with maintaining the spiritual health of their families and, by extension, the state. The Vestal Virgins, a group of priestesses dedicated to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, were revered for their commitment to purity and service. Their presence in the Temple of Vesta was a source of comfort and stability for the people of Rome, embodying the ideals of devotion and sacrifice. However, the reality of a Roman woman's life was often filled with challenges and hardships. Despite their crucial roles, women were largely excluded from political power and decision-making. They could not vote or hold office, their voices stifled in the halls of power where men made the rules. The pain of this exclusion was palpable, a silent struggle that lingered in the hearts of many. The stories of women like Lucretia highlight the immense weight of societal expectations. Lucretia was a paragon of virtue, a woman whose honor was fiercely protected. Her tragic fate, marked by betrayal and violence, would resonate throughout Roman history, igniting a revolution. Her courage and sacrifice became a rallying cry for those who sought justice, illustrating the profound impact a single woman could have on the course of a nation. In the face of adversity, Roman women demonstrated remarkable resilience. They often found ways to exert influence behind the scenes, using their relationships with powerful men to advocate for their families and communities. The wives and mothers of influential leaders wielded a subtle power, their opinions shaping the decisions of their husbands and sons. The bond between mothers and their children was particularly strong, and a mother's love and guidance were considered vital in raising future statesmen and warriors. The heart of the Roman household pulsed with the love and labor of its women. Their hands, worn from work yet gentle in touch, nurtured not only their children but the very spirit of Rome. They prepared meals that filled the home with warmth, creating spaces where laughter and stories flowed freely. In their daily lives, these women embodied the essence of Roman values, loyalty, strength, and devotion, serving as the moral compass for their families. As the city of Rome grew and evolved, so too did the roles of women. The late Republic saw women becoming more vocal in public life, advocating for their rights and freedoms. They gathered in groups to discuss ideas and influence change, a quiet revolution brewing beneath the surface. Women like Fulvia, the wife of Mark Antony, became prominent figures in political life, their ambitions and desires unmistakable. This shifting landscape ignited hope and possibility. Women began to see glimpses of their potential, their voices rising like a chorus in the heart of the city. Their stories, once silenced, began to find space in the annals of history. Through the eyes of these remarkable women, the world of early Rome transforms from a mere backdrop to a vibrant tapestry of resilience, love, and strength. Their lives were a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, and their contributions, often overlooked, shaped the foundations of a society that would stand the test of time. In the heart of ancient Rome, women carved out a legacy of their own, one that resonated with the promise of a brighter future, woven into the very soul of the city they loved. In the heart of ancient Rome, where legends intertwined with the lives of ordinary people, a tragic figure emerged who would forever alter the course of history. Her name was Lucretia, and her story, steeped in sorrow and honor, echoed through the ages, a testament to the power of virtue and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Lucretia was not just a name, she represented the very ideals of Roman womanhood. Known for her beauty and grace, she was the wife of Collatinus, a nobleman of great standing. Her home was a place of warmth, laughter, and love, where the values of family and honor thrived. She embodied the virtues of a Roman matron, chaste, loyal, and dignified. In a society where a woman's honor was intricately tied to her behavior, Lucretia stood as a shining example of virtue. But her story takes a dark turn, revealing the fragility of honor in a world rife with power struggles and greed. One fateful day, a group of noblemen, driven by envy and arrogance, decided to test the fidelity of their wives. They boasted about their own wives' beauty and virtue, while casting doubt on that of Lucretia. Their hearts filled with contempt and their minds clouded by a desire for dominance, they hatched a plan to see if the tales of Lucretia's purity were true. Tarquin the Proud, the king of Rome, led this band of nobles, his ambition and lust igniting a deadly fire within him. Fueled by his unchecked desires, he decided to visit Lucretia. Under the cover of darkness, he stealthily made his way to her home, a predator stalking his prey. His heart raced, not with love, but with a sense of entitlement that came from being king. He believed he could take what he wanted, regardless of the cost. When Lucretia opened her door, she greeted Tarquin with respect, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. She welcomed him into her home, her heart full of warmth and hospitality. But that warmth quickly turned to ice as Tarquin revealed his true intentions. In a moment that would shatter her world, he violated her, stripping away not just her dignity, but the very essence of her being. The light in Lucretia's eyes dimmed as the weight of betrayal settled heavy upon her shoulders. In the days that followed, Lucretia found herself in a whirlwind of despair. The walls of her once happy home closed in around her, suffocating her spirit. She felt as if she had become a ghost, haunting the very place that had once been her sanctuary. Consumed by grief and shame, she could not bear the thought of living with the stain of dishonor. How could she face her husband, her family, or herself after such an atrocity? The pain clawed at her heart, leaving deep scars that would never fully heal. In a final act of defiance and a testament to her virtue, Lucretia summoned her husband and her father. With trembling hands and tears streaming down her face, she recounted the horrifying tale of her violation. Her voice was filled with sorrow, yet it rang with a fierce determination. She demanded that they seek justice, not just for her, but for all women who had suffered at the hands of tyrants. She urged them to rise against the king, to take a stand for honor and integrity. In her eyes, they saw the flicker of hope that change was possible, that her story could spark a revolution. But the burden of her shame was too heavy to bear. In a heartbreaking moment, Lucretia took her own life, plunging a dagger into her heart. Her blood stained the very ground she had walked upon, a vivid reminder of the price of honor and the devastating impact of tyranny. The sound of her final breath echoed through the ages, a haunting cry for justice that would awaken the hearts of many. News of Lucretia's tragic fate spread like wildfire throughout Rome. Her death ignited a fire in the hearts of the people, a burning desire for freedom from the oppressive reign of Tarquin the Proud. The nobility rallied, and the common citizens, inspired by Lucretia's sacrifice, rose to challenge the monarchy. Her story became a rallying cry, a symbol of resistance against tyranny and injustice. The cries of Lucretia echoed through the streets, transforming from sorrow to a battle cry for freedom. Lucretia's legacy transcended her tragic end. She became a symbol of the struggle against oppression, her tale woven into the fabric of Roman identity. Her story was told and retold through generations, a poignant reminder of the power of virtue and the cost of tyranny. She was immortalized in literature and art, her name forever linked to the birth of the Roman Republic. In every heart that resonated with her story, Lucretia lived on. Her virtue, her honor, and her tragic sacrifice inspired countless souls to fight for justice, to stand against oppression, and to demand a world where women could live freely, without fear. She became more than just a figure in history, she became a beacon of hope for those who felt powerless, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit could rise and demand to be heard. The myth of Lucretia is more than just a story of sorrow, it is a powerful testament to the strength of women and their undeniable impact on the world around them. Her tale resonates with every generation, a haunting reminder that the fight for justice is never in vain. In the shadows of her tragedy, the seeds of revolution were planted, forever changing the course of history. Lucretia's name became synonymous with honor and sacrifice, a legacy that would echo through time, reminding us all of the power of one voice to inspire change and ignite hope. In the heart of ancient Rome, where the air was thick with ambition and honor, a young woman named Lucretia was born into a lineage steeped in nobility and virtue. Her family was well respected, a blend of strength and grace, a lineage that echoed the values of loyalty and honor that defined Roman society. Lucretia was raised within these walls, surrounded by the teachings of her ancestors, who instilled in her the importance of family, integrity, and the burdens that came with being a woman of noble birth. Lucretia's father, Spurius Lucretius, was a man of great standing, a figure known for his wisdom and adherence to the virtues that shaped their world. Her mother, a devoted matron, modeled the very qualities expected of a Roman woman. Together, they nurtured Lucretia, guiding her through the intricacies of Roman life. She learned the significance of her name, the weight it carried, and the legacy she would one day uphold. The echoes of her family's past filled their home, stories of valor, duty, and sacrifice, shaping Lucretia into a young woman destined for greatness. As Lucretia grew, she caught the eye of Collatinus, a young man whose heart was as noble as his lineage. Their love story unfolded amidst the societal expectations of their time. Collatinus was not just drawn to Lucretia's beauty, it was her spirit, her intelligence, and her unwavering sense of honor that captured his heart. They were married in a celebration filled with joy and promise, their union a testament to the values they both cherished. The bond they formed was not just a personal one, it represented a merging of two noble families, an alliance that strengthened their ties within Roman society. In the early days of their marriage, Lucretia and Collatinus created a home filled with warmth and love. They hosted gatherings where laughter echoed through the halls, the walls adorned with memories of their shared joy. Lucretia managed their household with grace, embodying the ideal Roman woman, ensuring that her home was a place of refuge and strength. She was not just a wife, she was Collatinus's partner, his confidant, sharing in both his triumphs and challenges. The two were respected in their community, their bond seen as a model of fidelity and virtue. Yet, the weight of their societal roles pressed heavily upon them. As members of the upper class, they were expected to adhere to the strict codes of conduct that governed their lives. Lucretia felt the burden of her lineage, knowing that her actions would reflect upon her family. She was the keeper of her household's honor, and with that came an unspoken pressure to uphold the ideals of Roman womanhood. The whispers of society would judge her every move, scrutinizing her character and virtue at every turn. The expectations for women in Roman society were stringent, and Lucretia understood the immense responsibility she bore. Women were often viewed as vessels of honor for their families, their worth measured by their ability to produce heirs and maintain the family's reputation. A woman's purity was paramount, it was her greatest asset, something to be safeguarded at all costs. The thought of dishonor sent shivers down her spine, a haunting reminder of the fragility of her status and the importance of her conduct. Lucretia's marriage to Collatinus symbolized more than just a union of love, it was an alliance steeped in duty. They were both aware of the importance of their roles within the larger framework of Roman society. Their families' reputations were intertwined, and their actions had the potential to impact the very fabric of their community. They were a model couple, yet beneath the surface lay the ever-present tension of expectation and obligation. In the quiet moments, Lucretia would reflect on her family's legacy, the stories of her ancestors echoing in her mind. She felt the weight of their sacrifices, the honor they fought to uphold. The very walls of her home seemed to hold whispers of their struggles and triumphs, a reminder of the path she was meant to follow. She envisioned a future where she could honor her family and continue their legacy, where she would be celebrated not just for her beauty, but for her strength and intelligence. Yet, in a world that often reduced women to mere symbols of virtue, Lucretia craved a deeper significance. She longed to be recognized not just as a daughter or a wife, but as an individual with her own thoughts, desires, and ambitions. The walls of her home were both a sanctuary and a prison, a space filled with love yet bound by the expectations of society. She yearned to carve out her own identity, to find a place where she could thrive beyond the confines of her roles. The love between Lucretia and Collatinus was genuine, a bond that transcended societal norms. They shared dreams and aspirations, envisioning a future where their children would inherit not just wealth, but also the values of honor and integrity. Lucretia envisioned herself as a mother, imparting the lessons of her lineage to her children, nurturing them to be strong and virtuous individuals. In her heart, she held the hope of a brighter future, a world where honor would reign supreme, and love would conquer all. But the shadows of impending tragedy loomed over her idyllic life. Unbeknownst to Lucretia, her world was about to be shattered. The very values she held dear would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Her life, filled with promise and hope, would soon become a battleground for honor and betrayal. As she moved through her days, Lucretia clung to her dreams, her spirit unbroken despite the weight of expectation. She understood that her lineage carried with it the stories of countless women who had come before her, women who had fought to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. With each passing day, she vowed to honor their legacy, even as she faced her own trials. In this world of uncertainty and looming tragedy, Lucretia's spirit shone brightly. She became a beacon of hope, her lineage a testament to the strength of women in a patriarchal society. Her story, intertwined with that of her husband, would resonate through the ages, echoing the themes of honor, sacrifice, and the unyielding power of love in the face of despair. Lucretia was more than a noblewoman, she was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even within the confines of societal expectation, the human spirit can strive for greatness. In ancient Rome, a world pulsating with ambition and intrigue, the patrician class stood at the pinnacle of society, wielding power and influence that shaped the lives of millions. The patricians, descended from the city's founding families, held a unique status that set them apart from the common folk. Their bloodlines were a source of pride and entitlement, but beneath the polished veneer of wealth and privilege lay a fierce struggle for control and dominance. These noble families lived in grand homes adorned with intricate mosaics and fine furnishings, their lives a tapestry of luxury and leisure. They wore exquisite togas that flowed like clouds, each stitch symbolizing their status. But their wealth came at a cost, as they were expected to uphold the values of honor, loyalty, and duty to their city. Every move they made was scrutinized, every decision a potential trigger for rivalry or resentment. The patricians were not just leaders, they were symbols of hope and despair, embodying the complexities of power. Within this elite class, fierce rivalries brewed like storms on the horizon. Families vied for political influence, using their connections and resources to sway decisions in their favor. The Senate, a powerful governing body, was filled with patricians who debated policies that could affect the lives of everyone in Rome. Their words carried weight, but behind closed doors, the stakes were much higher. Each vote was a dance of manipulation, alliances forged and broken in the shadows. The air crackled with tension as they navigated the treacherous waters of politics, ever aware that a single misstep could lead to disgrace. At the heart of this power struggle were families like the Tarquins and the Lucretians. The Tarquins, with their ambition and ruthlessness, sought to extend their control over Rome. Their name echoed in the halls of power, yet it was tinged with fear and suspicion. Tarquin the Proud, the last king of Rome, was the embodiment of the excesses of patrician rule. He was known for his arrogance, believing he was above the law, a king destined to command respect. But this power came with a heavy burden. He had to constantly protect his position, and the longer he ruled, the more enemies he created. On the other side stood families like the Lucretians, whose values were steeped in honor and integrity. Spurius Lucretius, Lucretia's father, represented the ideals of the old guard, a man committed to the welfare of his city and family. He believed in the importance of virtue, standing as a counterbalance to the ruthless ambition of the Tarquins. In a world where betrayal lurked at every turn, he taught his daughter the values that would one day guide her through her own trials. As Lucretia navigated her life within this powerful class, she was acutely aware of the expectations placed upon her. The patricians were not just rulers, they were the guardians of tradition and morality, even as they engaged in a constant battle for dominance. The pressure to conform to societal norms weighed heavily on her shoulders. She understood that her actions would reflect upon her family, for within this intricate web of relationships, honor was both a weapon and a shield. Women of the patrician class were often relegated to the background, their roles primarily defined by their relationships with the men in their lives. They were expected to be virtuous wives and devoted mothers, maintaining the honor of their families while being largely excluded from the political machinations that consumed their husbands. However, Lucretia stood out among her peers. She possessed a strength of character that defied the limitations placed upon her. Her intelligence and determination made her a silent but powerful presence within the household, a woman whose influence would soon ripple through the fabric of Roman society. As the patricians maneuvered through their complex world, the tensions between the classes escalated. The plebeians, the common people, grew restless under the weight of patrician rule. They toiled in the fields and served in the armies, yet their voices were often drowned out by the aristocratic elite. The gulf between the rich and the poor widened, sowing seeds of discontent among the lower classes. The once harmonious relationship between the patricians and plebeians began to fray, threatening the stability of the city they all called home. Lucretia felt the weight of this growing unrest. As she moved through the marble halls of her home, the echoes of dissent filled her mind. She heard whispers of revolution, stories of common folk rising against their oppressors. The noble houses, once bastions of strength, began to show cracks. The fear of losing power loomed large in the hearts of the patricians, driving them to act with increasing desperation. Yet amidst this turmoil, Lucretia clung to her ideals. She believed that the true strength of Rome lay not in the power of the patricians, but in the hearts of its people. She yearned for a day when honor would not just belong to the noble families, but would resonate throughout the city. With every gathering, she listened to the discussions of her husband, Collatinus, and his peers, absorbing their words, but also reflecting on the silent voices of those outside their walls. The bonds of family remained a cornerstone of patrician life. Marriages were often arranged for political gain, alliances forged in the interest of power and status. Love was a luxury seldom afforded to those within the upper echelons of society. Lucretia's marriage to Collatinus, while rooted in genuine affection, was also a union of convenience, strengthening their family's standing in a volatile political landscape. They both understood the importance of their relationship, yet in the shadows lurked the ever-looming threat of betrayal. In this world of opulence, Lucretia's heart ached for the common people, their struggles echoing in her mind as she navigated the opulent lifestyle expected of her. The feast tables groaned under the weight of extravagant dishes, while outside her window, she could hear the cries of those who toiled just to survive. The disparity was stark, a constant reminder of the fragility of honor and virtue in a society built on power and privilege. As she grappled with her place within this class, Lucretia felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. She knew that the actions of the patricians could shape the future of Rome. The political games played in the Senate had real consequences for the lives of the people who depended on their leadership. The struggles of the plebeians were a distant echo, yet she felt an undeniable connection to their plight. A flicker of rebellion ignited within her, a desire to bridge the gap between the classes, to bring forth a new era where honor was not exclusive to the patricians. The tides of history were shifting, and the power dynamics that had long favored the patricians began to change. The whispers of revolution grew louder, the cries for justice and equality echoing through the streets. Lucretia stood at the center of this tempest, her heart aching for the future of her city. She understood that her family's legacy was at stake, and the choices they made in the coming days would echo through history. As the shadows deepened around her, Lucretia prepared to take a stand. The world of the patricians, with its grandeur and power, was on the brink of upheaval. In her heart, she knew that the time had come for the voices of the oppressed to be heard. The struggles of the past would not be in vain. They would pave the way for a new beginning, a new era where honor, integrity, and justice would reign supreme, not just for the patricians, but for all Romans. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the ancient city of Rome, the air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. The festival of the gods was upon them, an annual celebration that brought the streets alive with color, music, and the sweet scent of incense. It was a time when the very essence of Roman culture shone through, a vibrant tapestry woven from the threads of tradition, devotion, and community. For Lucretia's family, this festival was not just an event, it was a sacred obligation that bound them to their heritage, to the gods they revered, and to the people they loved. The preparation began days in advance. Lucretia, filled with a sense of purpose, watched as her home transformed into a sanctuary of celebration. Flowers adorned every corner, their petals bursting with color, symbolizing fertility and renewal. Her mother and the other women of the household bustled about, weaving garlands and arranging offerings, their laughter mingling with the sounds of clanging pots and cheerful chatter. Each bloom was carefully selected, representing different gods and goddesses, from Jupiter to Juno, each one honored through these sacred rituals. Lucretia felt a thrill in her heart as she helped with the preparations. She was a young woman proud of her lineage, knowing that her family played a crucial role in the festival's success. It was their duty to ensure that the gods looked favorably upon Rome, and Lucretia understood the weight of this responsibility. As the daughter of a noble family, she was expected to embody the virtues of her ancestors: grace, humility, and a deep sense of duty to the community. When the day of the festival finally arrived, the streets of Rome erupted in jubilation. People dressed in bright tunics and flowing togas filled the city, their laughter ringing through the air like music. The sound of flutes and drums echoed as musicians played, inviting all to join in the celebration. The excitement was palpable, a living thing that pulsed through the crowd, and Lucretia felt herself swept away in its current. Her family took their place at the forefront of the festivities, their noble status granting them a position of honor. Lucretia walked beside her father, Spurius Lucretius, as he greeted dignitaries and community leaders. She watched him with admiration, noting how he carried himself with dignity, embodying the very spirit of Rome. As he exchanged words with the crowd, Lucretia felt a surge of pride knowing that their family's legacy was intertwined with the very fabric of the city. The rituals began at dawn, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. Lucretia stood alongside her family at the temple, a sacred space filled with the fragrance of incense and the soft glow of candles. The priests, draped in ceremonial robes, led the crowd in prayers, invoking the blessings of the gods. The air buzzed with energy, the voices of the faithful rising like a wave, each person seeking favor and protection from the divine. As the rituals progressed, Lucretia felt a deep connection to her ancestors. She thought of the women who had come before her, who had walked the same path, who had stood in this very place, honoring the gods and praying for their families. Their spirits seemed to swirl around her, whispering words of encouragement and love. In that moment, she understood that she was part of something much larger than herself, a lineage that stretched back through the ages, filled with stories of sacrifice, devotion, and strength. After the prayers, the festivities truly began. The streets were alive with the sounds of laughter and celebration. Colorful stalls lined the pathways, offering food, wine, and trinkets. Lucretia's heart danced with joy as she sampled sweet pastries drizzled with honey and tasted wine that flowed like rivers. Her eyes sparkled with delight as she watched children darting about, their faces painted in vibrant colors, joyfully participating in games and contests. As the sun reached its zenith, the family participated in the grand procession. Lucretia walked proudly alongside her parents, her heart swelling with pride. They were the bearers of tradition, leading the community in honoring their gods. The crowd cheered, their faces filled with admiration, and Lucretia felt the weight of her family's honor pressing gently upon her shoulders. This was their moment, a celebration of their lineage and the values they upheld. The procession wound its way to the heart of the city, where a massive altar awaited. There, the community gathered to witness the sacrifices made to the gods, a ritual believed to ensure prosperity and peace. Lucretia watched in awe as the priests prepared offerings of fruits, grains, and animals, each item representing gratitude and reverence. The energy of the crowd surged as the priests raised their hands in prayer, calling upon the gods to bless the city. In that sacred moment, Lucretia felt a profound sense of unity. The festival was more than just a celebration, it was a powerful reminder of the bonds that held their community together. In a world often marked by strife and division, this festival was a moment of harmony, a collective heartbeat that resonated through the streets. As the flames flickered and smoke curled toward the heavens, Lucretia closed her eyes, sending her own silent prayers into the ether. She prayed for her family, for her city, and for the hope that one day, love and honor would prevail. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the festival, the atmosphere shifted into one of revelry and joy. Dancers filled the streets, their bodies moving in sync with the rhythm of the drums. The music swept through the air, intoxicating and alive, inviting everyone to join in. Lucretia felt herself drawn into the circle, laughter spilling from her lips as she twirled and spun, surrounded by friends and family. In that moment, all the worries of the world faded away. She was simply a young woman celebrating life, surrounded by the love of her family and the warmth of her community. The festival stretched into the night, lanterns illuminating the darkness with a soft glow. Stories were shared, laughter echoed, and bonds were strengthened. Lucretia felt a profound connection to those around her, a shared understanding of what it meant to be part of something greater. As she sat with her family, the joy of the day reflected in their eyes, she understood that this festival was a testament to their heritage, a celebration of their commitment to honor and duty. In the midst of the festivities, Lucretia's heart swelled with gratitude. She thought of the sacrifices made by her ancestors, of the struggles that had shaped their family, and of the traditions they had preserved through the ages. Each festival was a reminder of their resilience, a testament to the strength of their bond. As she looked around at the joyful faces, she knew that their family's legacy was alive and well, woven into the very fabric of Roman society. As the night drew to a close, Lucretia felt a lingering warmth in her heart. The festival of the gods had been a celebration of life, a moment where past and present converged, where honor and joy danced hand in hand. In the flickering candlelight, surrounded by her loved ones, she understood that this was more than just a festival. It was a promise to uphold their values, to honor their lineage, and to carry forth the legacy of love and duty that had been passed down through generations. With a heart full of hope, Lucretia embraced the spirit of the festival, knowing that the light of their family would continue to shine brightly in the days to come. In the heart of ancient Rome, where the whispers of history lingered in every corner, Lucretia embodied the essence of virtue and grace. Her life was a testament to the ideals of Roman womanhood, a beacon of strength in a society that often sought to define her by the men in her life. From a young age, she was taught the importance of honor, loyalty, and integrity, values that would shape her into a woman of remarkable character. Lucretia's mornings began with quiet reflection. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows of her family's home, she would often seek solace in the small garden that flourished just outside. With gentle hands, she would tend to the flowers, taking pride in their beauty. Each bloom felt like a part of her soul, a reminder of the strength and resilience required to thrive in a world filled with challenges. It was in these moments of solitude that she would meditate on her role as a daughter, a wife, and ultimately, a symbol of virtue for her community. The values of Roman womanhood were woven into the very fabric of her existence. Lucretia understood that a woman's worth was not solely defined by her beauty or her family's wealth, but by her actions and character. She aspired to embody the ideals of pietas, a deep sense of duty to her family and her gods, and gravitas, a seriousness of mind that reflected her commitment to moral integrity. Every choice she made was influenced by these principles, guiding her through the complexities of life in Rome. Her upbringing was steeped in tradition, and her family took pride in their noble lineage. Lucretia's parents instilled in her the importance of education and virtue, encouraging her to cultivate her mind alongside her spirit. She learned the stories of great Roman women, figures who had shaped history through their courage and intellect. These tales inspired her, igniting a flame of determination within her. She realized that she, too, could make a difference, not just in her family but in the world around her. Lucretia's character was marked by an unwavering sense of loyalty. To her, family was everything. She held her parents' teachings close to her heart, embracing her role as a loving daughter and a devoted wife. Her marriage to Collatinus was built on mutual respect and affection. Together, they navigated the complexities of life, standing shoulder to shoulder in times of joy and sorrow. She was not just a figure in the background, she was an equal partner, supporting him in his endeavors while also seeking her own purpose within their shared life. Her commitment to virtue extended beyond the walls of her home. Lucretia actively participated in the life of her community, embodying the ideal of virtus, a concept that encompassed bravery, honor, and moral integrity. She visited the sick, helped the needy, and provided guidance to younger women, imparting the lessons she had learned. Her presence was a source of comfort, and her words were imbued with wisdom. She understood that true strength lay in uplifting others and creating bonds that transcended the boundaries of social class. Despite the societal constraints placed upon women, Lucretia's spirit remained unbroken. She challenged the notion that a woman's worth was tied solely to her domestic role. Instead, she sought to carve out her own identity, one that embraced her individuality while honoring her family and traditions. In conversations with other women, she encouraged them to find their voices, to stand tall in a world that often sought to silence them. Her heart swelled with pride as she witnessed the transformation of those around her, knowing that she had played a part in their journeys. The ideals of Roman womanhood were rooted in the concept of fides, or fidelity, which extended beyond mere loyalty to one's family. It encompassed a woman's commitment to her community and her dedication to moral principles. Lucretia embodied this ideal wholeheartedly. Her heart was a sanctuary of compassion, and she understood the weight of her words and actions. She approached each day with a deep sense of purpose, striving to be a source of light in a world that could sometimes feel dark and uncertain. In her heart, Lucretia harbored dreams of a future where women could be celebrated for their intellect and contributions, rather than merely their appearances. She longed for a society where the voices of women resonated alongside those of men, where their wisdom and strength were recognized and valued. The fire of ambition burned brightly within her, fueling her desire for change. She knew that every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, could ripple through time, creating a legacy that would inspire future generations. As Lucretia navigated the complexities of her life, she faced challenges that tested her strength. There were moments of doubt, times when she felt overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon her. Yet, she drew from the wellspring of her virtues, reminding herself of the principles she held dear. Each trial became a stepping stone, a lesson that fortified her spirit. She understood that true courage lay not in the absence of fear, but in the ability to rise above it. Her reputation as a woman of virtue began to spread throughout Rome. People spoke of her kindness and strength, of her unwavering commitment to her family and her community. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that a woman could possess both grace and strength. In a world that often sought to diminish women, Lucretia stood tall, her heart overflowing with love and determination. As the years passed, Lucretia's life continued to reflect the ideals she cherished. She became a beloved figure in her community, a woman whose presence inspired others to strive for their best selves. Her home was a sanctuary of warmth, filled with laughter and love. She nurtured her children with the same values she had embraced, instilling in them the importance of virtue and honor. In the quiet moments of reflection, Lucretia often pondered the legacy she would leave behind. She knew that her life was intertwined with the stories of countless women who had come before her. With each act of kindness, every word of encouragement, she forged a connection to those who had paved the way for her. The ideals of Roman womanhood were not just a burden, they were a gift, a sacred duty that she embraced with all her heart. Through the trials and triumphs, Lucretia's spirit remained unyielding. Her life was a testament to the power of virtue, a beacon of hope that illuminated the path for others. In a society that often sought to define her, she carved out her own identity, one that celebrated both her femininity and her strength. Her heart, filled with love and compassion, became a wellspring of inspiration for generations to come. As she continued to walk the path of virtue, Lucretia knew that her story was far from over. The values she held dear would echo through time, a reminder of the strength and resilience of women. She embraced her role as a guardian of these ideals, understanding that her life was not just about herself, but about the legacy she would leave for those who would follow. In the tapestry of history, her name would shine brightly, a symbol of hope and honor for all who dared to dream. In the heart of Rome, the air hung heavy with tension, a palpable silence broken only by the distant sounds of laughter and revelry. The day had begun like any other, but it was about to transform into something far more significant. A challenge was looming, one that would test not just the bonds of marriage, but the very essence of honor among men. Collatinus, a man of noble lineage, sat among his peers, each face reflecting a mixture of pride and anxiety. The question that hung in the air was simple yet deeply troubling: were their wives as loyal as they believed? Collatinus, who cherished Lucretia with every fiber of his being, found himself caught in this web of doubt. It had started innocently enough, a conversation among friends, a friendly banter over a cup of wine. But soon, the lightheartedness faded, replaced by a gnawing fear that clutched at his heart. His friends, perhaps in jest, began to share stories of their wives, tales woven with threads of suspicion. "Have you ever wondered?" one of them asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "How do we really know our wives are faithful?" The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, swirling with unspoken fears and insecurities. In that moment, the idea of a contest was born, a challenge to see whose wife could be deemed the most virtuous. They would ride to their homes, each man would witness his wife's fidelity, and then return to share the truth. What began as a light-hearted jest quickly escalated into a matter of pride and honor, a battle of reputations where each man would stand to gain, or lose, everything. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Collatinus felt a tightening in his chest. He knew Lucretia, knew her heart, and believed in her unwavering loyalty. Yet, the challenge brought forth a tempest of doubt, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his friends were eager to see him falter. He looked around at their faces, their eyes glinting with the thrill of competition, and he felt a rush of protectiveness wash over him. He had to defend Lucretia's honor, not just for her, but for their love, which he held dearer than life itself. Collatinus returned home, his heart racing, a storm brewing inside him. He found Lucretia sitting by the hearth, the flickering flames casting soft shadows on her face. She looked up, her eyes shining with warmth, and in that moment, all his fears melted away. How could he doubt her? She was the embodiment of virtue, a woman of integrity whose heart belonged to him and him alone. The thought of questioning her loyalty made him ache inside. As he approached her, he felt a wave of emotions crash over him, love, admiration, and an overwhelming urge to protect her from the doubts swirling in his mind and those of his friends. "Lucretia," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "A contest has been proposed, a challenge among my peers to test the loyalty of our wives." He paused, searching her eyes for any hint of doubt. "I do not wish to question your fidelity, for I know you to be true." Her expression shifted, concern etching lines on her brow. "Collatinus, what do you mean? What sort of contest?" "It is foolishness, I know," he replied, his heart heavy. "But I must ask, can you assure me of your faithfulness?" In that moment, Lucretia's gaze burned with a fierce intensity. "You should not need to ask that question. I am yours, and I have always been. My heart belongs to you, and no one else." Her words pierced through the doubt that had clouded his mind. In her eyes, he saw the truth, her unwavering loyalty, the love they had built together. They had shared dreams, laughter, and moments of pure joy. To question that bond felt like an affront to everything they had created together. Yet, the challenge loomed over them, a dark shadow that threatened to consume their happiness. Collatinus found himself torn between the challenge and the love he held for Lucretia. He knew he had to return to his friends, but the thought of placing her in such a position made his heart ache. "I must go back," he finally said, his voice filled with conflict. "But I will not ask you to prove anything. I trust you." With those words, he left the warmth of their home, stepping into the night, where uncertainty awaited him. Each step felt heavy as he made his way back to his friends. They awaited him, eyes bright with curiosity, eager to hear what he would say. Collatinus stood before them, his heart pounding, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Have you returned with news?" one of his friends inquired, a grin stretching across his face. "Did you find your wife in the arms of another?" "No," Collatinus replied, his voice firm. "I found a woman of virtue, a partner who has been nothing but faithful to me. I will not engage in this contest. To question her loyalty is to question the very foundation of our love." His declaration stunned the group into silence. Some of his friends shifted uncomfortably, a hint of shame creeping into their expressions. Collatinus felt a swell of pride within him. He was willing to stand alone against the tide of doubt, to protect the woman who had captured his heart and soul. However, the challenge had not yet run its course. A ripple of doubt had spread among the men, and soon enough, the atmosphere became charged with rivalry. The stakes had risen, and the need to prove one's honor overshadowed the loyalty they claimed to cherish. As each man returned to his home, eager to validate the love they believed they possessed, Collatinus was left with a feeling of unease. Hours passed, and the darkness deepened around him. The contest stirred within the hearts of his peers, driving them to seek validation in ways that threatened to destroy the very bonds they claimed to hold dear. As each man returned to share his findings, stories emerged. Some wives praised for their fidelity, others whispered about with doubt. The laughter that once filled the air was now laced with tension, as suspicions crept into the conversation like a thief in the night. Yet, as he listened to the tales unfold, Collatinus felt a sense of resolve harden within him. No matter the outcome of the contest, he would not allow his love for Lucretia to be tarnished by the opinions of others. Their bond was sacred, forged through trust and respect. Each story that emerged only served to reinforce the values he held dear, the understanding that true love could not be measured by fleeting moments or baseless rumors. As night fell, Collatinus returned home, determined to find peace amid the storm. He entered their sanctuary, and there she stood, waiting for him. The sight of Lucretia filled him with warmth. The world outside could be fraught with doubt, but here, in the embrace of their home, they were safe. Collatinus, she greeted him softly, her eyes reflecting the flickering light from the hearth. How did it go? He took a deep breath, fighting back the rush of emotions. It was foolishness, he admitted, stepping closer to her. But I stood firm. I trust you, Lucretia. I trust our love. As the words left his lips, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. In that moment, everything else faded away, the contest, the doubts, and the opinions of men. What remained was the unbreakable bond they shared, a testament to the power of love and loyalty in a world that often sought to challenge it. Lucretia reached for him, her touch igniting a spark of hope within him. They stood together, two souls intertwined, their hearts beating in harmony. The world outside could be chaotic, but within these walls, they would create their own sanctuary, one built on trust, love, and an unwavering commitment to each other. In that quiet space, Collatinus knew that no contest could ever define their love. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the rugged landscape as a group of young men set off toward Rome. Their hearts brimmed with excitement and a sense of adventure, but beneath that bravado lay a current of anxiety. They were on a quest to prove their worth, to challenge the fidelity of their wives, and the stakes felt higher than any of them had anticipated. Among them was Collatinus, a man torn between loyalty and the pressures of a society that demanded proof of virtue. As they traveled, the road stretched out before them like a ribbon of destiny. Laughter filled the air, but Collatinus found little joy in the playful banter. His mind was clouded with thoughts of Lucretia. He could picture her clearly, her kind smile, the way her eyes sparkled with warmth and intelligence, and how her laughter felt like music that wrapped around him like a soothing balm. The thought of her made his heart swell, but it also brought a rush of unease. What if the challenge led to heartbreak? What if, in the course of this foolish contest, they uncovered truths that could tear their lives apart? The young men marched forward, their armor glinting in the sunlight, but the weight of their task pressed heavily on Collatinus. Each step brought him closer to Rome, yet it also brought him closer to the moment that would change everything. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the skyline loomed before them, a majestic reminder of what they were fighting for. Rome, the heart of their world, pulsed with life, its streets teeming with hopes, dreams, and untold stories. With each passing moment, the air buzzed with anticipation, but Collatinus felt a gnawing apprehension deep within. He glanced at his friends, each one buoyed by youthful bravado. They spoke of their wives with a mixture of pride and jest, but Collatinus remained quiet, lost in his thoughts. How could they so easily question the loyalty of the women they loved? He thought of the beauty of Lucretia, not just in appearance, but in spirit, her strength, her values, her unwavering commitment to their life together. She was more than just a wife, she was his partner, his confidant, his heart. As they entered the bustling streets of Rome, the vibrant sounds of the city surrounded them. Merchants shouted their wares, children laughed and played, and the aroma of fresh bread wafted through the air. But none of it reached Collatinus. His mind was fixated on the approaching moment when he would see Lucretia again. Would she be waiting for him? Would she understand the turmoil in his heart, the weight of the contest that loomed over them like a dark cloud? The men reached their homes, excitement mixed with trepidation. Collatinus entered his house, and the familiar sight of Lucretia standing there, her hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes bright with love, stopped him in his tracks. It was as if time had frozen. She looked up, and in that instant, all the doubts and fears fell away. Her presence felt like a warm embrace, a reminder of everything he had fought for. "Collatinus," she exclaimed, rushing toward him with open arms. The world outside melted away as he enveloped her in his embrace. The warmth of her body pressed against his made everything feel right, even as his heart wrestled with the unease of the challenge ahead. "Lucretia," he whispered, holding her tightly. "I missed you more than words can say." She stepped back, searching his eyes. "You look troubled. What happened? Did the others speak of their wives?" Collatinus hesitated, the memories of the challenge hovering in his mind like a dark shadow. He wanted to protect her from the weight of the contest, but he knew he had to be honest. "They did. There was a contest among us, a foolish challenge to test the loyalty of our wives. Before he could finish, Lucretia's expression shifted, a flicker of hurt crossing her features. "You mean to say that they questioned my loyalty?" "It is not what I believe," he rushed to say, his heart racing. "I know your heart, Lucretia. I trust you more than anything in this world. But the words of men can carry great weight." As he spoke, he watched her expression transform from confusion to understanding. The strength in her gaze reassured him. "Collatinus, I am not afraid. My love for you is steadfast. No contest can change that." Their connection was electric, the air thick with unspoken promises. Just as he was about to share more, they were interrupted by the arrival of the other young men, their voices ringing out in playful jest. They gathered outside, eager to recount their own tales, the camaraderie buzzing with a mix of pride and bravado. Collatinus felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. He knew that, while his friends meant no harm, their lightheartedness masked a reality that could tear apart the very fabric of their relationships. He turned back to Lucretia, the tension between them palpable. "I do not want you to feel as though you must prove anything. You are my wife, and that is enough for me." Her eyes sparkled with appreciation. "I will stand by you, no matter what. Your honor is my honor." Collatinus felt a surge of love for her, a fierce protectiveness that ignited his spirit. He stepped outside, standing tall among his friends, ready to confront the challenge that had been laid before them. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice steady, cutting through the laughter and chatter. "Let us speak of this contest you have created. It is not a matter of loyalty but a matter of trust, a trust that we must hold dear in our hearts." His words silenced the group, their faces turning toward him, expressions shifting from laughter to seriousness. The camaraderie that had filled the air was now replaced with a heavy silence as they recognized the weight of what he was saying. "You all hold your wives in high regard," Collatinus continued, his heart pounding. "But let us not forget the strength of love and loyalty that binds us together. To question their fidelity is to question our own worth as husbands. We cannot allow this contest to define us or our relationships." His voice resonated with a passion that ignited a flicker of understanding among them. One by one, his friends lowered their heads, some in shame, others in reflection. It became clear that they had ventured down a path that could lead to destruction, one that threatened to unravel the very bonds they had sought to strengthen. "Let us choose honor," Collatinus concluded, "and let that honor be reflected in our love for our wives." As his words hung in the air, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter and jokes faded, replaced by a solemn realization of what was truly at stake. The young men stood together, a brotherhood bound not just by their shared experiences but by the understanding that love should never be tested in such a manner. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the group as they shared stories of their wives, of the love that inspired them to be better men. Collatinus glanced at Lucretia, who watched him with pride and admiration. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of hope. They had faced a challenge, and together, they had chosen a path that would lead them toward a future filled with love, respect, and unwavering trust. With the weight of the contest behind them, Collatinus and Lucretia stood united against the world, their love glowing like the sun that now set behind them. The journey back to Rome had brought them face to face with difficult truths, but it had also solidified the bonds they shared. In that moment, surrounded by the laughter of friends and the warmth of their love, Collatinus knew that their hearts would remain entwined, no matter what trials lay ahead. A cold wind swept through the quiet halls of Collatinus's home, carrying with it an unsettling sense of foreboding. It was an ordinary evening, the kind where laughter and chatter filled the air, but a shadow loomed that no one could see. Lucretia sat at her loom, the rhythmic sound of the thread slipping through her fingers providing a comforting backdrop to the evening. But tonight, the warmth of her home felt oddly distant, as if the walls themselves were whispering warnings. Outside, the world bustled with life, but inside, a stillness hung heavy. Lucretia's mind drifted, her heart racing with an unshakable feeling that something was about to change. The peace of her marriage with Collatinus filled her with joy, yet a nagging doubt made her uneasy. She could not shake the feeling that danger lurked just beyond the threshold of her door. Sextus Tarquin, a young man from the royal family, had always been known for his charm and arrogance. But as the son of Tarquin the Proud, he carried an entitlement that set him apart. His ambition knew no bounds, and his desire to conquer everything in his path extended beyond the battlefield. Rumors had circulated about his reckless behavior and wild pursuits, but tonight his eyes were set on a prize far more dangerous than mere glory. As the sun sank below the horizon, the household began to settle down. Collatinus had been called away on business, leaving Lucretia alone. Although she was no stranger to solitude, tonight felt different. The shadows danced against the walls as candles flickered, casting eerie shapes that mirrored the anxiety swelling inside her. Sextus, aware of the absence of her husband, saw an opportunity. He had watched Lucretia from afar, captivated by her beauty and grace. To him, she was not merely the wife of his friend, but a prize to be claimed, a conquest to bolster his own reputation. As the night deepened, he crept closer to her home, the night cloaking his intentions. Lucretia remained unaware of the approaching danger, lost in her thoughts of Collatinus. She envisioned the warmth of his smile and the way his eyes sparkled when he spoke of their future. Yet, with every passing moment, that sense of foreboding wrapped tighter around her heart. Just as she set her weaving aside and prepared for bed, a knock shattered the stillness of the night. Her heart raced as she approached the door, hesitant yet curious. When she opened it, there stood Sextus, his presence imposing and unfamiliar. "Good evening, Lucretia," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of something darker. "I was passing by and thought to check on you." Lucretia felt a chill sweep through her, but she forced a polite smile. "Sextus, it is late. Collatinus is not here." His eyes flickered with annoyance at the mention of her husband, but he masked it with a charming smile. "I know. But I came to see you. I would not want you to feel lonely." A shiver ran down her spine, the warmth of their earlier interactions now replaced by a creeping unease. "Thank you for your concern, but I am quite well," she replied, trying to close the door gently. Sextus stepped forward, blocking her path. "Please, Lucretia, I mean no harm. I only wish to talk." His voice was low, almost a whisper, sending an unsettling jolt through her. Realizing she could not dismiss him so easily, Lucretia reluctantly allowed him inside. As she moved back, she felt the weight of his gaze on her, an invasive pressure that made her skin crawl. The air around them thickened with tension, and she fought the urge to flee. "Your husband speaks of you often," he said, taking a seat without invitation. "He is a fortunate man, but I wonder if he truly appreciates what he has." Lucretia kept her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "Collatinus values me, just as I value him." Sextus leaned closer, an unsettling intensity in his eyes. "Do you truly believe that? Can you not feel the admiration in the hearts of others? Men who could offer you so much more than he can." She felt the heat of anger rise within her, a protective instinct sparking. "I am not interested in flattery, Sextus. My life is with Collatinus. Please do not presume otherwise." A flicker of rage crossed Sextus's face, quickly masked by a disarming smile. You are too proud, Lucretia. And that pride could be your downfall. Suddenly, the room felt smaller, the shadows deepening around them. The confidence that had once exuded from her now wavered as she realized the danger he posed. She had invited him in, believing he meant no harm, but the look in his eyes told a different story. This was not a visit born of friendship but of obsession. With each moment, she sensed his resolve hardening. You think you can resist me? He hissed, stepping closer until the distance between them vanished. You are beautiful, Lucretia. You have caught my eye, and I will not let you go. Panic gripped her heart as she stumbled backward, searching for a way to escape. Sextus, you must leave. This is inappropriate. His laugh sent chills through her. Inappropriate? We both know you feel something. Do not deny it. The arrogance in his voice was suffocating. He lunged forward, seizing her wrist with a force that shocked her. Let go of me. Lucretia cried, her voice trembling as she tried to break free. But he only tightened his grip, reveling in her fear. Her mind raced for a plan, for an escape, but the realization that she was alone weighed heavily on her. She called for Collatinus, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The world outside continued on, blissfully unaware of the storm raging within her home. Sextus's laughter echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the twisted reality she faced. Do you not understand? He whispered, his breath hot against her skin. You belong to me now. There is no escaping that. In that moment, Lucretia felt the ground shift beneath her. The warmth of her home transformed into a prison, the walls closing in around her. She struggled against his hold, a mix of anger and despair fueling her fight. You will never have me, she cried, her voice breaking, her spirit refusing to yield. Sextus's eyes darkened, and for a moment, she saw the monster lurking within him. You will come to regret those words, Lucretia. I will make you understand your place. The world spun as he pushed her onto the floor, his intentions clear. She was trapped, the weight of hopelessness crushing her. In that moment, everything she had built, her love, her honor, her very identity, hung in the balance. Her heart raced, and she fought against the overwhelming fear. I am not your possession, she screamed, each word a defiance against the darkness threatening to engulf her. I will not be broken. But Sextus was relentless, and the darkness of that night swallowed her cries. The shadows around them deepened, the laughter of Rome outside a distant memory, fading into silence as the horror unfolded. In that heart-stopping moment, Lucretia understood the terrible truth: the honor and virtue she had fought to uphold were being stripped away. All the love, the ideals of fidelity and trust, now felt like ashes in her mouth. As the night wore on, the weight of her world shattered around her, leaving only the stark reality of betrayal and pain. Lucretia was left alone in a silent void, her spirit aching for the love she once knew. The laughter of Rome outside continued on, ignorant of the tragedy that had just unfolded within the walls of her home. The sun rose over Rome, casting a golden light on the city, but the warmth of the day did little to lift the chill that had settled in Lucretia's heart. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the wall, her mind replaying the events of the night before like a broken record. Each moment felt like a fresh wound, raw and agonizing. The laughter and chatter of the waking city outside felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of the life that had been stolen from her. Lucretia was no longer the vibrant woman who had woven dreams and laughter into the fabric of her home. Instead, she felt hollow, as if a part of her soul had been ripped away. The shame and anger swirled inside her like a storm, tearing apart every shred of her former self. She had always taken pride in her virtue, her loyalty, and now it felt like those very ideals had been shattered by the hands of someone she had trusted to honor them. With trembling hands, she reached for the tapestry she had been working on, but the colors blurred together, swirling into a chaotic mess that mirrored her emotions. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but the weight of her shame kept her silent. The silence in her home was suffocating, amplifying the sense of isolation that engulfed her. How could she face anyone after what had happened? What would they think of her? Every memory of Collatinus flooded her mind, reminding her of the love they had built together, the promises they had made. The thought of his face, filled with pride and admiration, felt like a dagger to her heart. How could she explain this to him? How could she look into his eyes knowing that she had been violated, that his trust had been broken? The love that had once felt so secure now twisted into a heavy burden, a chain she felt unable to break. As the hours passed, Lucretia found herself moving like a ghost through her home, her feet carrying her to places that had once been filled with joy but now felt haunted by despair. She wandered into the garden, where the flowers bloomed brightly, their colors a sharp contrast to her sorrow. The scent of jasmine wafted through the air, a sweet reminder of happier times. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she recalled the afternoons spent there with Collatinus, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves. But those memories were tainted now. All the beauty of her life felt overshadowed by the dark cloud that loomed overhead. Each flower she touched seemed to wilt under her fingers, reflecting the dying light of her spirit. How could she carry on when everything she had known had been stripped away? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Lucretia turned to see her maid, a kind-hearted woman named Flora, approaching with concern etched across her face. "My lady, are you well?" she asked gently, her voice soft like a balm to Lucretia's wounded soul. But the question sent another wave of pain crashing over her. "How can I be well?" Lucretia replied, her voice cracking. "I am not who I was. I am broken." Flora stepped closer, her eyes filled with compassion. "You are not broken, my lady. You are still you, and you are stronger than you think." But Lucretia shook her head, the weight of her experience crushing her spirit. "What is strength when I have lost everything? How can I face the world knowing what I have endured?" Flora reached for Lucretia's hands, squeezing them tightly. "You must tell your husband. He deserves to know the truth. You do not have to bear this alone." The thought of revealing the truth to Collatinus sent a fresh wave of panic through Lucretia. How could she speak the words? How could she summon the courage to tell him what had happened? The fear of his disappointment and anger gripped her heart like a vice. Yet, deep down, a flicker of hope ignited within her. Perhaps sharing her burden would lighten the load, if only a little. But the darkness of the previous night was still fresh, the memory of Sextus's forceful presence looming over her like a specter. In her mind, she could still feel the coldness of his touch, the way he had taken everything from her without a second thought. Lucretia was trapped in a prison of her own making, torn between the need for healing and the fear of exposure. Flora's comforting words echoed in her mind. "You deserve justice, Lucretia. Your pain should not be hidden in silence." With a deep breath, Lucretia found a flicker of determination rising within her. "You are right," she finally whispered. "I cannot let him win. I will not allow this darkness to take away my voice." That decision, however fragile, felt like a small light breaking through the suffocating shadows. Lucretia knew she had to speak to Collatinus, to reclaim her narrative. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow on the horizon, she felt a sliver of hope stir within her heart. The evening brought Collatinus home, and the sight of him sent a surge of emotions rushing through her. He entered with his usual vigor, but the moment he saw her pale face, the laughter in his eyes faded. "Lucretia, my love. What is wrong?" Her heart raced, the moment she had been dreading had arrived. The words tangled in her throat, a storm of fear and uncertainty overwhelming her. "Collatinus," she began, her voice trembling. "I need to tell you something terrible." His expression shifted to concern, and he crossed the room to take her hands. "You can tell me anything. I am here for you." Tears streamed down her cheeks as the weight of her secret pressed heavily on her heart. "I was assaulted last night. Sextus, he came to my home while you were away." The world around her seemed to shatter. Collatinus's face blanched, his grip tightening around her hands as if anchoring himself to reality. "What? No. This cannot be. Lucretia, are you certain?" Each word felt like a dagger, But she pressed on, recounting the horrific events, each detail a burden she had carried alone for far too long. She watched as his expression shifted from disbelief to anger, a storm brewing in his eyes. "Lucretia, I should have been there," he roared, his voice filled with anguish. "I should have protected you." In that moment, Lucretia felt a wave of compassion wash over her. She had feared his anger, but instead, he was filled with a desperate need to shield her from the world's cruelty. "Collatinus, it is not your fault," she reassured him, her heart aching for his pain. "I could not have predicted this. I am still here, still me. But I need you. I need your strength." His expression softened, the fury giving way to a protective resolve. "We will make this right. He will not get away with this. I swear it." In the aftermath of betrayal, as their hands clasped tightly together, Lucretia began to feel the flicker of hope transform into a flame. Together, they would face the storm. Together, they would fight for justice. The emotional turmoil inside her began to settle, a sense of purpose taking its place. Although the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, Lucretia had found her voice. No longer would she be a victim in the shadows. She would reclaim her power, not just for herself, but for every woman who had suffered in silence. With Collatinus by her side, she was ready to face the world anew, determined to rise from the ashes of her pain and reclaim her life. The air in Lucretia's chamber felt heavy, as if it was saturated with the weight of her thoughts. She stared out the window, watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky, each one a stark reminder of her inner turmoil. The vibrant colors of the dawn illuminated the world, yet within her, a darkness brewed that seemed impossible to escape. She had told Collatinus everything, pouring out her heart and soul, and yet she felt more lost than ever. As she looked down at her hands, she could still see the faint marks of Sextus's grasp, the unwanted reminder of the violence that had shattered her life. It gnawed at her, a painful reminder that her purity, the very essence of her womanhood, had been taken from her. The shame was suffocating, wrapping around her like a vine, constricting her breath and stealing her strength. She had fought so hard to reclaim her voice, to seek justice, but a deeper thought loomed over her mind like a shadow. Could she truly live with the memory of what had happened? What justice could she find when the world would always look at her through the lens of her assault? The questions haunted her, taunting her with their unrelenting grip. The very fabric of her existence felt frayed, and Lucretia grappled with the idea of sacrifice, a thought that both terrified and comforted her. In the dim light of the room, she could see the faces of those she loved, their hopes and dreams woven into the tapestry of her life. She thought of Collatinus, his unwavering love and the fiery determination in his eyes when she had told him the truth. He had promised to fight for her, to bring Sextus to justice. But at what cost? The thought of dragging her family through the shame, the judgment, and the scorn made her heart ache. That ache deepened when she recalled the strength of Roman women before her, the stories of their sacrifices for the greater good. Their bravery inspired her, yet now, faced with her own reality, she felt small and powerless. In that moment, she made a choice, one that would not only alter her fate but ripple through the lives of those around her. Lucretia closed her eyes, letting her thoughts swirl until they settled into a painful clarity. She would seek justice through self-sacrifice. If her voice could not change the hearts of the people, perhaps her actions could awaken a call for change. She could not live in a world where a woman's worth was defined by the cruelty of a man. Instead, she would become a symbol of strength and resilience, a living testament that honor and virtue were worth fighting for. As she stood from her seat, a newfound determination surged through her veins. She knew this path would be fraught with pain, but she felt it was a necessary step, one that might ignite the spark of rebellion against the tyranny that had plagued their society. The thought of sacrificing herself, not only for her honor but for all women who had suffered in silence, filled her with an empowering sense of purpose. Stepping into the sunlight, Lucretia felt the warmth of the day wash over her, igniting a fire within. She moved to her mirror, gazing at the reflection before her. There was a woman standing there, one who had endured unimaginable pain but refused to be broken. She touched her cheek gently, as if to reassure the woman staring back at her. This woman would rise again. With each step she took, her heart raced with a mixture of fear and resolve. She needed to speak with Collatinus, to lay bare her decision. As she crossed the threshold of her chamber, the air seemed to shift around her, thickening with anticipation. What would he say? How would he react to the idea that she was willing to sacrifice herself for the greater good? Collatinus was in the courtyard, pacing back and forth, the lines of worry etched across his forehead. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted from concern to confusion. Lucretia. You're here. I was so worried about you. He moved toward her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders ease just a little. But that relief was short-lived as she steeled herself, knowing that what she was about to say would shatter the fragile peace they had built. Collatinus, we need to talk, she said, her voice firm yet trembling with the weight of her choice. He nodded, concern replacing the warmth in his eyes. What is it? Are you okay? I am not okay, she confessed, fighting back tears. But I have made a decision. I want to seek justice, but not in the way you think. His brow furrowed, confusion etching deeper lines on his face. What do you mean? I cannot live with the shame of what has happened to me. I feel like I am not the woman you married, and I refuse to be defined by this. I want to make a statement. Collatinus's eyes widened, fear creeping into his voice. What are you saying, Lucretia? You don't need to prove anything to anyone. She took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of her words settle in her chest. I believe that if I sacrifice myself, if I show them the true cost of their actions, it will awaken something in the people. Perhaps it will spark a change, a movement against the injustice that has been allowed to flourish. If I do this, it will be for every woman who has suffered like I have. His expression shifted, a mix of anger and anguish crossing his features. You cannot. This is not the way. I will not allow you to put yourself in danger. You are worth so much more than that. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for him, her heart breaking at the thought of causing him more pain. Collatinus, I love you, and it is precisely because I love you that I must do this. You deserve a wife who is whole, a woman who is not haunted by her past. If my sacrifice can spark a fire in the hearts of the people, then it is worth everything. He shook his head, his voice filled with desperation. But you are everything to me. I cannot lose you. We can find another way. We can fight together. She stepped closer, her heart pounding as she gazed deeply into his eyes. This is the only way I can reclaim my power. I want to be more than a victim. I want to be a voice for those who cannot speak. I cannot let Sextus's actions dictate my life. Collatinus's expression softened, the fierce determination in his eyes wavering as he searched her face. You truly believe this is the only way? Yes, she whispered, her heart breaking for the pain this would cause him. If I do this, I can show them the truth, the real cost of their actions. As silence enveloped them, Collatinus stepped back, the realization of her choice settling heavily between them. If you do this, it will change everything. But you must promise me one thing. What is it? Promise me you will not let your spirit break. No matter what happens, know that you are more than this moment. You are the embodiment of strength and courage. With a trembling nod, she vowed, I promise, Collatinus. I will carry your love with me into whatever awaits. In that moment, she felt the bond between them tighten, forged by love, sacrifice, and the understanding of the monumental choice before her. As they stood there, the weight of the world pressing down upon them, Lucretia felt a strange sense of peace settle in her heart. She was ready to face whatever came next, ready to ignite the change that was so desperately needed. Her sacrifice would not be in vain. It would be a testament to her strength, a rallying cry for justice, and a promise that no woman would ever have to endure what she had suffered alone. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft murmur of Lucretia's breath as she gathered her final strength. Her family and closest friends stood around her, each face marked by sorrow and incomprehension. In the candlelight, shadows danced across her face, catching the resolve in her eyes as she prepared to do something that would shake Rome to its core. Her hands trembled only slightly, but her heart was unyielding. Collatinus, her husband, reached for her hand, his eyes filled with desperation and grief. "Lucretia, please," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of his agony. He had seen her struggle, the light in her eyes dimmed by a pain he could neither erase nor share. She held his gaze, her own eyes brimming with the fierce love and loyalty that had bound her to him all these years. She had been his beloved wife, his cherished partner, and in this moment, she would also become his heartbreak. With a quiet but powerful voice, she spoke to those around her, pouring out her pain, her shame, and her unbreakable resolve. "I am innocent," she began, her voice trembling yet firm. "But because of him, because of Sextus, I am forever tainted. I cannot live with this stain upon me, nor the pain it brings to all of you." Her words cut through the silence like a blade, raw and unshielded, each syllable steeped in anguish. Those around her watched, helpless, as she prepared to embrace her destiny, aware that they could do nothing to stop it. Lucretia's father, old and broken-hearted, reached out to her, his hands trembling as he tried to keep her close, to somehow hold on to the daughter he loved so dearly. "You do not have to bear this alone, my child," he said, his voice thick with grief. His face, lined with years of wisdom and strength, was now streaked with silent tears. He was a pillar in Rome, a man known for his unyielding honor and steadfast loyalty to his family and his city. Yet, here he was, powerless to save his beloved daughter from the decision she had made. "No," Lucretia replied, her voice steady. "If I live, I will be a symbol of disgrace. But if I die, I can be a call for justice, for all those who have been wronged." Her hand, cold and steady, wrapped around the dagger she had chosen. It felt heavy in her palm, yet also liberating, as though it carried the promise of a freedom no one else could grant her. She would not live under the shadow of shame inflicted upon her by the cruel hands of a man who believed he could take whatever he wanted without consequence. Her husband collapsed to his knees beside her, begging her to reconsider, pleading with words that seemed to echo against the walls without reaching her heart. His pain was almost tangible, woven into each whispered plea, his hands clutching at her gown as if he could keep her from slipping away. But Lucretia's face was calm, her gaze softened by the love she bore him, a love that now added weight to the choice she was about to make. Her voice, resolute yet filled with sorrow, carried through the room. "By this act, I shall show Rome that its daughters will not bear injustice in silence. I am the last to suffer like this." And then, without a moment's hesitation, Lucretia plunged the dagger into her heart. The room was filled with gasps and cries, and then silence, a silence that seemed to stretch endlessly as they watched her life ebb away. In that moment, her family and friends felt the crushing weight of her sacrifice settle upon them, filling the air with a grief so profound that it felt like the very walls were mourning her loss. Collatinus held her limp body, his own heart breaking as he cradled her in his arms, her lifeless form an unbearable testament to her courage and her choice. His tears soaked into her gown, but she could not feel them. Her spirit had already soared above the pain, leaving her body behind in its final gesture of defiance. The gravity of her death reached far beyond that small room. News of Lucretia's suicide spread swiftly through Rome, carried by whispers that grew louder with each passing hour. Her name became a rallying cry, a symbol of both injustice and resilience, echoing through the streets as her story ignited the flames of anger in the hearts of the people. The women of Rome, many of whom had suffered in silence, felt a spark of defiance, a glimmer of hope that perhaps they, too, could rise against the tyranny that had oppressed them. And the men of Rome, her father, her husband, and the friends who had witnessed her final moments, felt a fury they could not contain. She had given her life, her last breath, to make a statement, a plea for justice that could not be ignored. Her death was not a quiet end, but an unquenchable flame, one that would consume the corruption that had plagued their city for far too long. On the steps of the Senate and in the public forums, her father and husband spoke of Lucretia's virtue, her sacrifice, and the need for a new Rome, one that would no longer tolerate the abuses of power. They shared her story with everyone who would listen, ensuring that her voice, though silenced, would continue to resonate in the hearts of the people. And soon, the citizens of Rome, filled with righteous anger and grief, rose up, demanding justice not only for Lucretia but for all who had been wronged. Her death became the catalyst for a revolution that would bring an end to the monarchy, toppling the reign of the tyrants who had held Rome in their grasp. Lucretia's spirit, her unyielding sense of honor and justice, became woven into the fabric of Rome itself, a guiding star for a people who had suffered under oppression and were now ready to reclaim their city. As the sun rose on a new day, the streets of Rome were filled with voices, men, women, and children alike, united in their grief and in their determination to build a better future. Lucretia's death was a tragedy, a wound that would never fully heal, but it was also a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, courage and honor could light the way. And so, though Lucretia had fallen, her spirit lived on, a testament to the power of one woman's choice, one woman's voice, and the unstoppable force of a people united by justice and honor. She had chosen death, but in doing so, she had given life to the soul of Rome itself. The room was shrouded in a heavy silence, broken only by the trembling breaths of those who had stood witness to Lucretia's final act. Collatinus knelt beside her lifeless body, his mind swirling with sorrow, rage, and disbelief. He had lost his beloved, his heart and soul shattered by the sheer horror of her last moments, by the strength she had shown in choosing to die rather than live with dishonor. Yet now, in the stillness that followed her death, a new fire ignited within him, a relentless determination to see justice done, no matter the cost. Collatinus rose slowly, his hand brushing over Lucretia's cold fingers one last time, as if to draw strength from her even in death. The weight of her sacrifice settled heavily upon him, mixing with his rage, transforming grief into purpose. He looked around at the men who stood with him, noblemen, his friends, men bound by duty and honor, and saw his fury mirrored in their eyes. They, too, were overcome by Lucretia's suffering, by the injustice inflicted upon her, and the bitter shame that this could happen to a woman as virtuous as she. Each man felt the burden of her pain, and each knew that Rome itself was tainted by her blood. Lucius Junius Brutus, a man often thought to be meek, met Collatinus's gaze, his expression one of fierce resolve. Brutus had seen his share of cruelty under the reign of King Tarquin, and the silent injustice that festered in every corner of Rome had burned in him for years. But Lucretia's death, this had broken something open inside of him. It was as though her spirit had lit a fire in his heart, fueling a rage that would no longer be contained. Brutus's voice, quiet but unyielding, cut through the tension in the room. This cannot stand. For too long, we have suffered the cruelty of kings who believe themselves above us. We are not slaves. Rome is ours, and we shall have it back. The men gathered around him, each nodding with fierce determination, their fists clenched as if already holding the weapons they would need. They swore, one by one, that Lucretia's death would not be in vain, that they would see an end to the tyranny that had driven her to such a tragic fate. Her blood, they vowed, would be the last innocent blood spilled by the corruption of kings. And so, in that small room, surrounded by the cold, silent witness of her body, they pledged themselves to a cause that had simmered for years in the hearts of the oppressed. Collatinus felt his spirit harden with each word they shared, each oath they took. He would not mourn in silence, he would not let his wife's suffering fade into another quiet tragedy, forgotten and buried. He would carry her memory into battle, her final moments fueling his every step, every decision. He saw, with a clarity he had never known before, the Rome that they could build, a Rome without tyrants, without cruelty, a city that honored the lives of its people rather than trampling over them. As the night wore on, word of Lucretia's death spread through the city, whisper by whisper, igniting anger and grief in the hearts of every Roman who heard it. People gathered in the streets, hushed murmurs giving way to cries of outrage, as they mourned the woman who had been a beacon of virtue and strength. Mothers, daughters, fathers, and brothers, each felt the weight of her death like a personal loss, each stirred by the injustice that had driven her to such an end. She had become a martyr in an instant, her name etched into the hearts of Rome's people, her story lighting a spark in every soul. Brutus, standing beside Collatinus, looked out at the gathering crowd, his eyes dark with anger but alive with hope. This was the moment he had waited for, the moment when the people would stand with them, united in a common cause. His voice, steady and fierce, rang out into the night, carrying across the assembled crowd with the power of a man who believed, beyond all doubt, that change was possible. "People of Rome," he called, his voice unwavering, filled with the raw emotion of a man who had lost but was not yet defeated. "How long will we allow this injustice to reign over us? How many more of our loved ones must fall victim to the whim of a tyrant? Lucretia's death cries out for justice, for a Rome that is ours, a Rome where no man or woman suffers in silence under the rule of kings who think themselves gods. It is time to take back what is ours. It is time to rise." The crowd responded with shouts, a wave of agreement and rage, their faces lit with the shared fire of a people who had finally found their voice. Their anger grew, each person feeding off the fury of the others, until it was no longer the grief of one family but the outrage of an entire city. The call for justice echoed through the night, filling the air with the promise of revolution, a promise that they would not return to their homes until Rome was freed. Collatinus, Brutus, and the other noblemen moved through the streets with the people behind them, rallying them with the memory of Lucretia's honor, her sacrifice. Together, they painted the vision of a city unshackled from the cruelty of kings, a city where virtue and honor ruled instead of fear and tyranny. As they spoke, as they roused the people with their cries for justice, they each felt Lucretia's presence, guiding them, urging them forward. Brutus, his face set with an unyielding determination, drew a dagger from his side and held it high above the crowd. "By this dagger," he declared, his voice ringing with the strength of a man reborn, "we swear to drive out the Tarquins, to end their tyranny, and to restore Rome to her people. We shall no longer be slaves. Lucretia's blood shall be the last spilled unjustly. From this day forward, we fight for freedom, for honor, and for the memory of those we have lost." One by one, the men around him reached out, taking the dagger into their own hands, binding themselves to this cause with an oath that would echo through the ages. Collatinus gripped the dagger with the ferocity of a man who had been brought to the edge of despair, and who had now found a purpose worth living and dying for. Lucretia's face, her smile, her unwavering love and loyalty, filled his mind as he made his vow. He would see justice done for her, no matter the cost. With the dawn came the promise of a new Rome, a Rome built on the sacrifice of a woman who had refused to live with dishonor, and the men who loved her too fiercely to let her death be forgotten. The streets of Rome buzzed with a fervor unlike any seen before. News of Lucretia's tragedy had spread like wildfire, carried in the whispers of women, in the clenched fists of fathers, and in the hardened resolve of young men. The people, who had long endured the cruelty of the Tarquin rulers, now had a face to their suffering, a reason to rise against the chains that bound them. Lucretia's story became more than a story of a noble woman wronged. It became the battle cry of an oppressed city, the spark that ignited the embers of a revolution. In every corner of Rome, groups of citizens gathered, their voices hushed yet filled with intensity as they recounted the horrors of Lucretia's death and the cruelty that had led to it. The common people, farmers, artisans, merchants, who had once dared not utter a word against the monarchy, now found courage in their shared anger. Mothers with tear-filled eyes and fathers with clenched jaws spoke Lucretia's name as if it were a prayer. They vowed that no one else's daughter, wife, or sister would ever suffer at the hands of a king's son. Her name, her honor, became their own. Brutus, a man transformed by grief and determination, stood as the leader Rome had never seen before. He moved through the city with his fellow noblemen, his voice ringing out with a conviction that shook the hearts of all who listened. His words were not the polished speeches of kings or senators, but raw, fervent, and fueled by love for a woman who deserved so much more. "Rome belongs to her people," he proclaimed, his voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "No more shall we bow to the whims of tyrants. We are not their pawns, we are free men, and today, we take back what is ours." The crowd surged around him, their faces alight with a newfound strength. Men and women alike called out their support, their voices joining in a rising roar that reverberated through the narrow streets. Young men gripped whatever weapons they could find, farm tools, broken stones, even their bare hands, ready to stand against those who had ruled by fear and force for so long. Elderly men, with eyes dulled by years of silent suffering, raised their heads proudly once more, ready to see justice restored in their lifetimes. Children clutched at their mothers' skirts, eyes wide, absorbing the energy and determination that swept through the adults around them. Collatinus, Lucretia's husband, stood beside Brutus, his heart as heavy as it was resolute. He had lost the love of his life, but her memory now bound him to a purpose greater than himself. He spoke to the people with a voice thickened by sorrow, but his words carried the strength of a man who had faced unspeakable pain and was ready to turn that pain into action. Lucretia's spirit lives on in each of us, he said. In every Roman who has felt the weight of injustice, who has borne the sting of tyranny, her voice calls to you. Will you let her sacrifice be forgotten, or will you rise for her, for Rome? The people answered, their cries filling the air as they pledged their loyalty not to a king, but to each other, to the memory of Lucretia, and to a Rome where justice could finally prevail. Word spread swiftly, spilling out of the city walls and into the countryside. Farmers and laborers from the nearby villages, hearing of the uprising, left their fields and flocked to the city, driven by the same fury that now united every Roman heart. The city pulsed with a collective will, a surge of humanity determined to overthrow their oppressors. Brutus called upon every man and woman to stand as one, to remember the generations of pain they had endured and to see, in Lucretia's memory, the promise of a brighter tomorrow. No longer would they be ruled by fear, no longer would they bow to the whims of men who cared nothing for their people's lives. As the hours passed, Rome transformed from a city of muted voices into a living force, a united people who had reclaimed their courage and, with it, their city. In the shadows of the ancient temples, in the market squares, and along the worn stone roads, citizens made their plans. They armed themselves, not just with weapons, but with the fire of a people who had been held down for too long. The strength of their unity was more powerful than any weapon. For the first time, they saw themselves not as subjects of a king but as a people bound together by honor, by justice, and by a fierce love for their fallen sister, Lucretia. As dusk fell, Brutus and Collatinus gathered the people at the Forum, the heart of Rome. Thousands stood together under the evening sky, faces turned toward the men who would lead them in their fight for freedom. Brutus raised his hand, and silence fell over the crowd. He spoke with a voice that was both a roar and a whisper, filled with the weight of generations past and the hope of generations to come. Tonight, we rise for Rome, for Lucretia, and for each one of you who has suffered under the tyranny of the Tarquins. They may have taken from us our families, our dignity, and our peace, but they cannot take from us our will. Tonight, we reclaim Rome as our own, as a place where no king's cruelty will ever again stain our honor. We rise as one, and we will not stop until every chain has been broken, and Rome is truly free. The crowd erupted into cheers, a wave of sound that echoed through the hills and valleys surrounding the city. They were no longer just individuals, each with their private griefs and hardships. They had become a united force, driven by the memory of a woman whose virtue had sparked a revolution. Lucretia's story had lifted them from silence, transforming them from subjects into citizens, bound by a promise to each other and to the Rome they all dreamed of. By the end of that night, every citizen knew what they were fighting for. They would not rest until they had toppled the Tarquins and erased the stain of tyranny from their beloved city. They would take back Rome, driven by the spirit of a woman who had sacrificed everything for honor, for justice, and for the hope that her people could be free. And as they stood together, ready to march against the tyranny that had oppressed them for so long, there was no doubt in any heart that they would win. For Lucretia's spirit was with them, guiding each step, her name a rallying cry that would echo through the ages, immortalized in the hearts of the people she had died to protect. Among the turmoil in Rome, as citizens stirred with anger and grief over Lucretia's tragic fate, one man stepped forward whose resolve would forever change the course of Roman history. Lucius Junius Brutus was not a man anyone had seen as a leader. Known in his youth for his quiet nature and feigned foolishness, Brutus had remained a silent observer, a seemingly meek presence under the rule of the Tarquins. Yet, beneath this mask, he harbored a fierce hatred for tyranny and a deeply burning love for his people. He had watched, waited, and borne his silence, biding his time for the right moment to free Rome from oppression. Now, at last, he emerged as a lion among men, ready to turn his sorrow into action. Brutus was no stranger to the cruelty of the Tarquin kings. His own family had suffered at their hands, his father and brother had fallen victim to their relentless thirst for power, executed without mercy. To protect himself from a similar fate, Brutus had carefully concealed his true self. He walked the streets of Rome as a man who seemed oblivious to the intrigues of power and politics, a man too simple to threaten anyone. This facade earned him the nickname Brutus, meaning the dullard, and over time, it became a shield, protecting him from suspicion. In truth, Brutus was anything but a dullard. Every slight he suffered, every injustice he witnessed, fueled a silent storm within him. For years, he had carefully suppressed his rage, knowing that one day he would need every ounce of his strength to strike a single, decisive blow against tyranny. When the news of Lucretia's assault reached him, Brutus felt as though he had finally been given the spark he had waited for. This was not just any injustice, it was a tragedy that struck the heart of every Roman family. Lucretia was a noblewoman whose honor symbolized the very soul of Rome, and her violation was an affront to the people, to their dignity, and to everything they held sacred. Brutus recognized that her story would stir the hearts of Rome's citizens in a way no other injustice had. Her death was a call to action, a turning point, and Brutus felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him. The time had come to strip away the mask he had worn for so long and reveal himself as the leader his people needed. With a resolve hardened by years of silent suffering, Brutus took up Lucretia's cause, holding her lifeless body before the assembled Romans as a symbol of all they had endured. His voice, choked with grief but unwavering, called upon his fellow citizens to swear an oath of vengeance, not just for Lucretia, but for every Roman who had suffered under the Tarquins. By this innocent blood, he cried, I swear that I will pursue the Tarquins, their descendants, and all their kin, with fire and sword, and I will not stop until they are driven from Rome. His words stirred the crowd, igniting a fierce determination that resonated with the pain and anger buried in every heart. In that moment, Brutus became the voice of the people. He was no longer the dullard, the man who hid behind a mask of simplicity. He stood before them as a man of purpose, a man who had carried Rome's suffering in silence and who would now lead them to freedom. Those who had known him only as the quiet and unassuming Brutus were in awe of the strength and fire that now blazed from his eyes. Here was a man transformed by loss, a leader forged in the crucible of grief, standing before his people and calling them to rise. As he moved through the streets of Rome, rallying support for the revolt, Brutus was met with a swelling tide of loyalty and admiration. He spoke to the people with words that were both humble and fierce, drawing strength from the shared pain and fury that pulsed through the city. Every man who heard him saw in Brutus a reflection of their own hopes and sorrows. He was not a distant ruler, removed from the lives of the people. He was one of them, a man who had suffered as they had suffered, who now arose to lead them toward a common dream. Brutus's rallying of the Roman people went beyond words. He understood that to inspire lasting change, he would need to show the people a vision of Rome as it could be, a Rome without the weight of tyranny. He spoke of a republic, a place where power would not lie in the hands of a single family but would belong to the people. For the first time, Romans imagined a future where they could choose their own leaders, where no man would be above the law. This vision was revolutionary, and it touched something deep within the hearts of the people. Brutus's words gave them hope, a light in the darkness that had shrouded their city for too long. The men who had long feared the wrath of the Tarquins now found courage in Brutus's example. He was a man who had lived with their pain, who had felt their grief, and who now stood with them in their time of greatest need. As he led them in a vow to rid Rome of the Tarquins, the people felt their fear give way to a fierce determination. No longer were they subjects to be ruled over by tyrants, they were Romans, and together, under the guidance of Brutus, they would reclaim their city. Brutus's role in the revolt was not just that of a leader, he was the heart of the rebellion, a symbol of everything Rome could be if only it were free. His transformation from a silent observer to a powerful force for change captured the imagination of the people and united them in a common cause. With each step he took, each word he spoke, he breathed life into a dream that had once seemed impossible. He showed them that they had the strength to rise, that together they could create a Rome where no man was a king, and no woman's honor would ever again be sacrificed to the whims of power. In the days that followed, Brutus's call to arms echoed through every street, every home, every heart in Rome. His name became a symbol of courage, his presence a source of strength. With Lucretia's memory as their guiding light and Brutus as their leader, the people of Rome prepared to make history. They were ready to reclaim their city, to rise from the ashes of tyranny, and to forge a new future, a future where every Roman would be free. And at the center of it all was Brutus, a man who had borne his suffering in silence, who had waited for the right moment, and who now stood as the voice of a revolution. His heart beat not just for himself, but for every Roman who had ever tasted the bitterness of oppression. The dullard had risen, transformed by loss and hope, leading his people into a new dawn. The night was thick with silence, a silence charged with anticipation. In the hidden corners of Rome, where the reach of Tarquin's spies faltered, men whispered in low voices, eyes filled with a fierce determination and hearts weighted by the need for justice. These men, once subjects under the heel of Tarquin the Proud, now dared to dream of something greater. They dreamed of freedom, of a city ruled not by the cruelty of one man but by the wisdom of many. And at the center of it all was Brutus, standing with the weight of Rome's history on his shoulders, guiding his fellow conspirators toward a rebellion that would forever change their lives. Brutus had gathered Rome's noblemen, men who had seen their families fall prey to Tarquin's ruthless ambitions, men who had lived in fear of their king for too long. As they sat around him, Brutus laid out the plan, his voice a steady anchor for their swelling rage. Each word he spoke was like a flame, igniting the fury that had simmered within them for years. Tarquin the Proud had pushed them all to the brink, taking not only their freedoms but their dignity. His actions against Lucretia had been the last straw, a wound too deep to ignore. Now, these men no longer had the luxury of silence. Brutus looked into the eyes of his fellow Romans, and there was no doubt, no hesitation. They were bound together by an unbreakable oath, forged from grief and strengthened by love for their city. As they murmured their vows, the air seemed to pulse with the weight of their conviction. In the dim light, each face showed a blend of courage and trepidation, knowing full well the risks ahead. They understood that failure would mean death, not only for themselves but for their families. Yet they also understood that a life under Tarquin was a life without honor, and that was a fate worse than death. With great care, they mapped out each step of the rebellion, every move a piece in a fragile game. They knew Tarquin's spies were everywhere, and the king's paranoia would only grow as whispers of discontent reached his ears. They had to be precise, unyielding, and swift. There could be no second chances. They gathered intelligence, relying on servants loyal to their cause and women brave enough to pass messages under the cover of daily chores. Each act, though small, was crucial in their fight, and each Roman involved understood the immense weight of their role. The conspiracy grew, tendrils of defiance stretching across the city. In the markets, whispers spread among merchants. In the temples, priests cast knowing glances. The people of Rome, tired of the relentless cruelty and greed of their ruler, began to feel hope. It was as if the city itself was coming alive, preparing for the moment when it would finally break free from its chains. For the first time in years, Romans saw light in one another's eyes, a shared promise that they would soon stand as equals, no longer forced to bend to Tarquin's whims. But it wasn't just hope that kept the conspirators together, it was an unyielding sense of justice. They remembered the stories of their ancestors, of men and women who had built Rome through sheer will and bravery. Rome was not a city meant for one man's greed. It was meant to be a place where honor and valor ruled, where people lived by principles, not fear. Tarquin had defiled that vision, and now, with every plan, every whispered promise, these men were reclaiming it. In the dead of night, the conspirators moved through the city, leaving messages and signs for those who had pledged their loyalty. Some prepared weapons in secret, while others secured allies from nearby towns, men who had grown tired of Tarquin's tyranny and longed for a Rome that respected their lives. Each action they took seemed small, almost insignificant in the moment, but together they built a wave of rebellion that could not be stopped. They knew the risk, But in their hearts, they also knew they were fighting for something larger than themselves. They were fighting for Rome. Brutus, though often silent, became their strength, his very presence a symbol of resistance. Many of the conspirators had watched him grow, remembering the quiet young man who had once seemed too simple to challenge a king. Yet here he was, a pillar of resolve, a man who had masked his true intentions for years, waiting for the perfect moment to rise. The depth of his sacrifice, the years he had spent hiding his grief and anger, moved them all. In Brutus, they saw not just a leader but a man who carried the weight of their shared pain, a man willing to give everything for their freedom. The day of the rebellion dawned with a tense, electrifying energy. The conspirators moved in silence, every step calculated and deliberate. Brutus was at the heart of the movement, his eyes scanning each face, his mind focused on the task at hand. They gathered their allies, sending runners to rally the people in secret locations around the city. Each man had his part to play, and each move was carefully timed. They knew that as soon as Tarquin caught wind of their plans, he would strike back with all the brutality he was known for. When the people finally gathered, their eyes reflected a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Brutus stepped forward, raising his voice to address them. He spoke of Rome, of their ancestors, of the honor that had been stripped away by Tarquin's rule. His words stirred the crowd, binding them together with an unspoken promise. Here, in this moment, they were not just individuals. They were Romans, united in their shared love for their city and their collective resolve to reclaim it. As Brutus finished speaking, the crowd erupted with shouts, a powerful surge of voices that echoed through the streets. They moved together, a sea of faces filled with righteous fury, toward the heart of the city where Tarquin's palace loomed. Each step brought them closer to reclaiming their freedom, to casting off the darkness that had plagued them for so long. The very air seemed to pulse with their determination, a force so powerful it could not be ignored. Tarquin, realizing the strength of the rebellion, attempted to crush it with his guards, but the people's spirit was unstoppable. Men and women fought side by side, defending one another with a fierce loyalty that left the king's soldiers overwhelmed. Every clash, every cry, resonated with years of pent-up pain and a longing for justice. And at the front was Brutus, his heart set on the future he had fought so long to bring about. As the sun set that day, Rome had changed forever. The king's power crumbled, and in its place rose a new vision of Rome, one where every citizen held a voice, where honor would guide their leaders, and where no man would rule by fear alone. Brutus had led them through the darkness, and together they had claimed the dawn. The city held its breath. In the alleys and hidden rooms of Rome, whispers passed from one mouth to the next. These whispers carried the weight of anger, of heartbreak, of lives spent under a shadow too cruel to bear. Tarquin the Proud had crossed every line, taken what was sacred and trampled it, until even the strongest hearts in Rome could no longer bear to watch. And so, in that hush, plans were being made, not by one person, but by many, bound together by a quiet fury that could no longer be contained. Men gathered in secret places, some strangers, some friends, each one burning with the same unbreakable resolve. Lucius Junius Brutus, a man who had hidden his true strength behind a facade of simplicity for years, was now the heart of their rebellion. Brutus saw what was at stake, felt it deep in his bones, the unbearable suffering of Rome, the memories of Lucretia's tragic end, and the countless silent wounds carried by so many. He looked into the eyes of those around him, and he knew they were ready. They were ready to give their lives if that's what it took to rid Rome of its chains. They mapped their steps with precision, knowing that even a single misstep could lead to disaster. They divided tasks, assigned roles, each man given a purpose that would bring them one step closer to their freedom. Some among them would gather weapons, while others would infiltrate the guards loyal to the king. Even the smallest details were carefully planned. Every word they would say, every look they would share was practiced until it became second nature. They could not afford to be caught. Rome's future hung on the success of their every move. Brutus knew well the risks. Tarquin's power was vast, his grip on the city absolute. But there was something even greater uniting the conspirators, a fire lit by the injustices they had all witnessed. And with Brutus at the helm, this flame burned brighter than ever. They looked to him, trusting in his quiet strength, a man who had suffered as much as they had, who understood the sacrifices they were about to make. His silence had been a shield, but now his voice became their anchor. He spoke of courage, of duty, of the Rome they could reclaim, and as he did, he poured his own heart into his words, making every person feel their purpose. As they plotted, they looked to each other and saw the same fierce determination. They shared a promise, a bond that was built not on words but on a common love for their city, for the families they longed to protect, for the friends they had seen suffer. And in that shared gaze, they knew there was no turning back. Their lives, once ordinary, now held the weight of Rome's freedom. Their cause was righteous, and nothing Tarquin could do would ever silence that. The conspirators moved through the streets with caution, blending into the fabric of the city they loved. Each man played his part flawlessly, working as one heartbeat, one mind. Some bribed the guards, others distracted the king's closest advisors, and still others spread word of the rebellion, carefully finding those in the city who would stand with them. Their network grew with each passing day, an unseen web of loyalty stretching across Rome. Each person who joined felt that same hope, that same pain, and each promised their lives to the cause. And then the time came. The night was thick and silent, a perfect shroud for the final act. The conspirators assembled, each carrying the memory of what had brought them to this moment. They were not warriors trained for combat, they were fathers, sons, friends. But in their hearts, they carried something that could not be defeated, a fierce love for their city and a determination to free it from Tarquin's grasp. As they made their way to the palace, their movements were calm, every step a testament to their courage, every breath a reminder of what they stood to gain. Brutus led them, his face a mask of calm, though his heart beat with the weight of what was to come. The sight of him, strong and unyielding, filled the others with renewed strength. They would stand by his side until the end, each of them ready to give everything for the vision he had shared with them. And as they reached the palace, they were no longer just men, they were a force, united, driven by the need to see justice served. The doors opened, and the guards, long silent in their own resentment of Tarquin's cruelty, offered no resistance. Step by step, the conspirators moved through the grand halls, every inch of the place a reminder of the king's corruption. The walls, draped in luxury bought with the suffering of the people, only fueled their anger. Each marble column, each golden detail seemed to mock them, and yet they pressed on, their resolve unwavering. Then, in a room filled with opulence, they found him, Tarquin, the man who had taken so much from them, whose hands were stained with the innocence and dignity of Rome. For a moment, there was silence, a pause heavy with years of resentment and rage. And then, Brutus stepped forward, his eyes meeting Tarquin's with a gaze that held no fear, no hesitation. This was the end Tarquin had never seen coming, a reckoning brought about not by armies or riches, but by the hearts of ordinary men. Tarquin tried to defend himself, his words falling empty, his power no longer enough to shield him. The conspirators, each one hardened by what they had lost, listened to his pleas with cold resolve. He was a king without loyalty, a ruler without subjects, a man finally facing the truth of his own actions. And as the men of Rome closed in around him, they felt a profound release, the culmination of years of pain and patience. They had reclaimed what had been taken, restored honor to a city that had suffered in silence for too long. The rebellion was swift, but its impact rippled through every corner of Rome. Word spread that Tarquin had fallen, that the men who had once served him were now free. As dawn broke, the city came alive, people filling the streets, their faces alight with the hope of a new beginning. They looked to Brutus and the other conspirators as heroes, men who had risked everything to restore the honor of their city. And as Brutus looked out over the crowd, he saw the faces of those who had waited for this day, who had held on to hope even in the darkest times. In their eyes, he saw the Rome he had fought for, a city reborn from the ashes of tyranny. The rebellion had ended, but a new era had begun, one where justice would prevail, and where every Roman could once again hold their head high. In that moment, as the city filled with cheers and laughter, Brutus knew that they had not only freed Rome from a tyrant, but they had also returned its heart and its soul. This was the Rome they had always believed in, and now, it was theirs to protect. The air around Rome was charged with an intensity that no one could ignore. Every Roman heart beat with one purpose: to break free from the oppressive grasp of Tarquin the Proud. As word spread of the uprising and Tarquin's disgrace, it became clear that ending his reign was only the beginning. Tarquin had retreated, but he was not gone. His final stronghold loomed, a bitter reminder that the fight for Rome's freedom was not yet won. In the days that followed, soldiers, once bound by fear, now rallied with unbreakable resolve. These were men who had lived under Tarquin's ruthless thumb, watched loved ones suffer, and felt the sting of injustice too many times. They gathered at the gates of Rome, their hearts and minds unified in their desire to see this tyranny end. They were farmers, artisans, young men with no experience in warfare, yet, under Brutus's steadfast leadership, they marched as one, their courage stronger than any weapon. Every step toward the stronghold held the weight of years of suffering. Families and friends gathered in the streets, watching them go, eyes filled with hope and fear. They whispered prayers and exchanged silent glances, each aware of the cost that this fight could demand. Some clutched symbols of faith, others clung to loved ones a moment longer, knowing that some of these men may never return. It was as if all of Rome held its breath, each heartbeat a silent plea for victory and peace. Brutus, standing at the head of his army, wore a look that was both somber and unyielding. He had not only been a leader but a symbol of hope, a man who had thrown off the shackles of tyranny and embraced the weight of Rome's salvation. The men beside him drew strength from his presence, his silence more powerful than any speech. They knew why they were there. They had heard the stories of Lucretia, they had felt the sting of oppression, and they had each vowed to see this fight through to the end. As they approached Tarquin's stronghold, the sight of its stone walls stirred a mixture of fear and determination in their hearts. The fortress stood imposing, dark and silent, a symbol of everything Tarquin represented. To the men who faced it, it was not just a building, it was a prison, a stronghold of their deepest suffering, and they were determined to break it open. The generals, each one committed to freeing Rome, began to lay out the strategy. Every detail was considered: the strength of the walls, the movements of Tarquin's guards, and the timing of their attack. Failure was unthinkable, and with every instruction, Brutus's eyes burned with the memory of every injustice Rome had endured. The siege began with a silence so tense that it was almost unbearable. Then, with a single signal, the Roman forces surged forward, their cries breaking the silence, filling the air with a defiant roar. The first clash of weapons rang out, echoing across the fields, a sound that was both terrifying and thrilling. This was the battle they had prepared for, the moment they had all risked their lives to reach. The defenders of Tarquin's stronghold fought back with fierce loyalty to their ruler, yet the resolve of the Romans was unbreakable. Each Roman soldier fought not only with skill but with a fire that came from years of injustice. They advanced relentlessly, their steps driven by memories of loved ones lost and futures stolen. They fought as if every swing of the sword was reclaiming a piece of their city, of their dignity. Hours passed, the sun beating down on armor and shields, but the Roman forces did not falter. They pressed on, inch by inch, forcing their way toward the heart of the stronghold. At one point, a group of young soldiers broke through the gates, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt, yet their expressions fierce with purpose. They had trained for this moment, their bodies wearied but their spirits unyielding. They would not stop until every wall of that stronghold came crashing down. Inside, Tarquin felt the tremors of rebellion closing in on him. He, the once feared king, now faced the reality that the city he had crushed underfoot was rising against him. Every shout, every clash of steel sent chills down his spine. For the first time, he felt something he had long believed himself immune to: fear. Rome was no longer under his control, and with every passing hour, the walls of his stronghold became his prison. Outside, the Romans intensified their attack, their voices ringing through the air with a unified cry for freedom. The sight of Brutus, rallying the men, inspired even the weakest among them to rise. He fought beside them, his eyes never straying from the goal. For every wound, every lost soldier, the men fought harder, knowing that their sacrifices were carving the path to a Rome without tyranny. Brutus knew they could not falter, too much depended on this moment. The battle raged through the night, the stronghold slowly crumbling under the force of the Roman assault. Finally, as dawn broke, a cheer rose from the soldiers. They had broken through the last line of defense, and Tarquin's grip on the city was shattered. As the final gates fell, the soldiers poured in, faces filled with a mixture of triumph and exhaustion, their journey culminating in this single, powerful moment. They had done what had once seemed impossible, they had freed Rome. In the aftermath, Brutus walked among his men, his gaze somber as he looked upon those who had fallen. He knew the cost, knew the lives that had been given to achieve this victory. But as he raised his eyes to meet the faces of those who remained, he saw in them the resilience, the strength, the undying spirit of Rome. They had fought not for power, but for justice, for a city they loved. As they made their way back to Rome, the air was thick with a sense of triumph and loss, a strange blend of sorrow and pride. They had achieved what they set out to do, but each man carried with him the memory of those who had not returned, the silent heroes who had given everything for this victory. Brutus and his soldiers walked through the city gates to a crowd of weeping, cheering citizens, their gratitude pouring out in waves. This was a new beginning. The stronghold that had once represented Tarquin's power now lay in ruins, a testament to Rome's unbreakable spirit. Brutus, though weary, felt the weight of his purpose renewed. He looked out over his city, knowing that every scar, every wound, had led them to this moment. The people's faces were filled with hope, and in that hope, he saw the future of a Rome that would never again bow to tyranny. And in that dawn, as the sun rose over a free Rome, the promise was sealed in the hearts of every Roman who stood there. They would rebuild, they would remember, and they would honor those who had given everything so that Rome might be reborn. The reign of Tarquin the Proud teetered on the edge, and all of Rome seemed to pulse with a fierce, unshakable resolve. The people of Rome, united in spirit, had grown weary of living under the harsh shadow of a man who treated their lives, their dignity, as if they were nothing more than pieces on a chessboard. For years, they had endured a king who cared nothing for their welfare, who ruled with a cold hand, instilling fear and resentment rather than loyalty or love. Now, the moment had come, and the hearts of the people beat as one, driven by a shared determination to see the tyrant fall. Outside the city, at the very heart of the rebellion, soldiers prepared for the final confrontation. Brutus, who had taken on the mantle of leadership, stood with a look of grim purpose. His gaze swept over the faces of the men and women who had sacrificed so much to come this far, to challenge the man who had brought so much suffering upon them. There was no turning back, the taste of freedom was in the air, and every soul could feel it. In the cold hours before dawn, they began their approach. Tarquin's fortress stood as a dark, formidable reminder of his rule, but to the Roman rebels, it was no longer an impenetrable fortress, it was a prison that held their city captive. They advanced with a quiet fury, each step taken with the memory of lives lost, of loved ones hurt by the merciless hands of the Tarquin monarchy. In the silence, there was a weight, a feeling that history itself was watching, waiting for this moment. Then came the signal. The quiet of night erupted into the fierce roar of battle as Roman rebels surged forward, their cries filling the air, echoing off the fortress walls. The once mighty guards of Tarquin faltered under the relentless force of the Roman assault, fighting desperately, yet lacking the will that came from true purpose. For each Roman, every swing of the sword, every strike was a piece of their vengeance, a reclaiming of their lives from the tyranny that had stifled them. As the battle raged, Tarquin himself was shaken. The man who had ruled with arrogance and cruelty, who had once seemed untouchable, felt the walls closing in around him. Each roar of the advancing Romans grew louder, each cry a reminder of the oppression he had imposed upon them. For the first time, he truly faced the consequences of his actions. This was not merely a political rebellion, it was the soul of Rome itself rising against him. His fortress, his power, everything he had built, was crumbling, and he could no longer ignore the truth. Brutus and his forces pushed forward, each inch gained filled with the courage of the many lives that had paved the way. Those who fell did so knowing they were part of something that went beyond themselves, a cause that would reshape the future of their beloved city. The defenders of the fortress, men loyal out of fear or greed, began to falter, their confidence shaken by the relentless determination of Brutus's army. The Romans pressed on, their hearts hardened, their resolve unbreakable. Inside the walls, Tarquin paced, his mind racing. The noise of the siege grew louder, like thunder rolling ever closer. He knew his reign was over, but he could not bring himself to accept it. The power he had clung to, the throne he had taken by force, all now seemed to slip from his grasp, dissolving like smoke. With every passing moment, the reality of his end drew closer, until it felt like a weight crushing him, the way he had once crushed the spirits of his people. The rebels, sensing victory, pushed through the final defenses, and soon, they were inside the fortress. Their cries of freedom echoed through the stone corridors, each voice filled with a lifetime of grief and a newfound sense of hope. The rooms that had once been symbols of Tarquin's control now bore witness to his defeat. The people poured into every hall, every corner, sweeping through the fortress like a tide that could not be held back. With each step, they claimed their city back from the man who had treated it like his personal kingdom. Finally, Brutus confronted Tarquin himself. The tyrant, once feared by all, stood before him not as a king but as a man facing the consequences of his actions. Gone was the air of invincibility, in its place was a defeated man, stripped of the power he had abused. Brutus spoke not with anger but with a stern, unyielding resolve. He was the voice of every Roman, the embodiment of their rage, their sorrow, and their newfound strength. The people had spoken through him, and they had made their decision. Tarquin's rule was over. The downfall of Tarquin the Proud was not only a victory over a tyrant but a victory for the spirit of Rome itself. The people had fought, sacrificed, and suffered, but they had emerged stronger, united in a way that could never be undone. As the news of Tarquin's defeat spread through the city, a wave of relief, of joy, swept over the people. They gathered in the streets, in the temples, and every corner of Rome, weeping tears of joy, embracing each other, and sharing in the moment they had all dreamed of. This was their Rome, a Rome freed from the chains of tyranny. They had reclaimed not only their city but their identity, their dignity. The streets filled with songs and prayers, with the sounds of a people who had found hope again. They had taken back what was theirs, and they had done it together, as one. Brutus stood among them, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy. But in that moment, as he looked out over the faces of his people, he saw a future brighter than any he had ever imagined. The people's spirits were unbreakable, their voices rising together in a chorus that filled the night, the sound of a city reborn. In the end, Tarquin's legacy would be one of defeat, a reminder of the power of a united people, of the strength that comes when injustice is met with courage. His fall marked the dawn of a new Rome, a Rome where the voices of the people would be heard, where justice and freedom would not be ideals but truths they had fought for and won. The memory of that victory, of that unity, would echo through the generations, a testament to the power of hope, resilience, and the unwavering will of the people of Rome. The story of Lucretia did more than break hearts, it ignited the very soul of Rome. The quiet, dignified life she had led, ending in such unbearable tragedy, left ripples of grief and outrage across the city, reaching every home, touching every life. Hers was not just a personal tragedy but a deep, shattering wound that opened the eyes of her fellow Romans to a stark, inescapable truth. They could no longer live under the iron fist of kings who wielded unchecked power. Lucretia's suffering, her honor, and her sacrifice did not fade with her. Instead, they fueled a fire that would reshape the fate of Rome. In the days that followed her death, Lucretia's name became a symbol, her life a rallying cry. People mourned her deeply, not only because she was gone, but because her story made them painfully aware of the powerlessness they had all accepted for too long. Her courage in the face of such cruelty, her heartbreaking choice to end her life to uphold her honor, these were not forgotten. These acts brought an undeniable clarity to the minds of the Roman people. They could no longer ignore the cruelty of the Tarquin rule. They had lost too much, endured too much. Lucretia's story reached everyone, from the farmers in the fields to the tradespeople in the markets, from the young to the old. In her memory, the people found a shared conviction that something had to change, and it had to change now. The call for justice grew louder, turning into a collective demand that could no longer be ignored. Lucretia's husband, Collatinus, and Brutus, her cousin, became the voice of this demand. They spoke not just as men who had lost someone they loved, but as leaders who now carried the weight of an entire society's pain. In the assembly of Rome, before the people who had loved and honored Lucretia, Brutus held up his dagger, stained with the memory of her sacrifice, and vowed that no man, no king, would ever again hold such absolute power over Rome. His words resonated like thunder through the hearts of the people. With each sentence, he spoke not only for Lucretia but for every life that had been diminished, every spirit crushed by the hands of tyranny. It was as though Lucretia's spirit itself had risen among them, guiding them towards something they had never dared to dream of before, a life free from the whims of a single ruler. The very structure of Roman society began to shift. No longer would the people of Rome bow to the oppressive rule of the monarchy. Instead, they would create a new system, one where power rested with the people themselves. This was the dawn of the Roman Republic, born from the ashes of a tragedy that had touched everyone. With Brutus and Collatinus leading the charge, the people moved forward to dismantle the monarchy that had held them captive. In Lucretia's memory, the Romans drafted a system where power would be shared, distributed across many, where laws would be made with the welfare of the people in mind, not at the whim of one man. They declared that never again would they allow one person to rule unchecked, to abuse the lives of the citizens for personal gain. And so, Rome began its transformation, guided by principles of justice and fairness that honored the values Lucretia had represented in life. The monarchy was abolished, replaced with a republic, a government where two consuls would hold power together, elected by the citizens, answerable to them, and them alone. This was more than just a change in government. It was a rebirth, a reclaiming of dignity, of honor, of control over their own lives. Lucretia's story, her legacy, had done what years of suffering under kings could not. It had unified the people under a shared purpose, giving them the courage to break free. As the Republic took shape, Lucretia's name became synonymous with honor, with courage, and with a call to justice that would echo throughout the ages. In every public gathering, in every law they passed, the Romans carried with them the memory of her sacrifice. She was more than a martyr. She was the guiding spirit of a new era, one where power was no longer concentrated in the hands of the few but shared among the many, where laws would protect the people rather than exploit them. The republic that rose from Lucretia's tragedy was not perfect, and Rome still faced countless challenges. But the shift was irreversible. The Romans had tasted freedom, they had claimed their power, and they were determined to build a society that honored the values Lucretia had stood for. In every decision, in every moment of governance, there was an unspoken promise that they would never again allow a tragedy like hers to darken their lives. Lucretia's story reminded them constantly of the fragility of power, of the importance of justice, and of the responsibility they held to protect each other. As time went on, the story of Lucretia became a part of Rome's very identity. Parents told their children about her, shared her story with reverence and sorrow, ensuring that each new generation understood the sacrifices that had been made to give them the life they enjoyed. Statues were erected, ceremonies held, and every year, the people honored her memory with a solemn respect that transcended the boundaries of time. Lucretia's legacy was not just one of loss, but of transformation. Her death had shattered the illusion that the people were powerless, and in doing so, had given them the strength to reclaim their freedom. Her story was woven into the fabric of Roman life, a constant reminder of what could be lost if they allowed their vigilance to falter, if they forgot the price that had been paid. Lucretia's life, her values, her courage, became a beacon for all who sought justice, for those who believed in the dignity of human life, and the right to live free from fear. She was not only the spark of the Roman Republic, but a symbol of the enduring strength that resides within every person, waiting to rise up in the face of oppression. Her story was carried forward not just as a memory, but as a living part of Rome's spirit. It was whispered in the streets, shared in the homes, and honored in the hearts of the people. Her legacy was more than an event in history. It was a promise Rome made to itself, a commitment to a future built on the foundations of justice, courage, and an unyielding respect for the lives of its people. Lucretia's tragedy had given birth to a republic, and through it, she would live forever, a guardian of Rome's newfound freedom, her memory a guiding light that would inspire generations to come. The founding of the Roman Republic began with the pulse of a city's heartbreak and the strength of its people's will to change their future. From the ruins of grief and loss, from the memory of a woman who had died for her honor and the outrage that followed, Rome stood at the dawn of a new age. It was the dawn of a society where the voice of the people, long suppressed, finally had the power to shape the world they would live in. In the hearts of those who witnessed this profound transformation, there was a fierce determination, as if Lucretia's spirit herself lingered, guiding them, urging them toward a new beginning built upon justice and shared purpose. They had seen enough of tyranny. The people were ready to choose a different path, to reject kings who had held their lives in chains. This was their moment to build something no one could take from them, a government grounded in the very people who would live under it. It was the first time in their history that the people themselves would decide the rules, and that idea alone was exhilarating and terrifying. They were bound together by the vision of a society where no one person, no family, would have the power to control their lives as the kings had. With this dream of shared power came the creation of the first laws that would ensure no individual, no matter how powerful, could ever impose their will without limits. The establishment of the Republic meant something more than a change of government. It meant building a world where respect, fairness, and justice became the pillars of society. To safeguard these ideals, they crafted a system that would place power in the hands of elected representatives, chosen by the people and for the people. These representatives, consuls, would serve the public, holding authority only so long as they served honorably, only so long as they kept faith with those who placed their trust in them. In every corner of Rome, the echoes of these changes began to reverberate, filling the streets with hope. People could see a new society taking shape around them, a society built to protect their dignity and to prevent the tragedy that had befallen Lucretia from ever happening again. Her name became a silent but powerful reminder of why they had chosen this path. The Republic was a promise that they would never again allow the unchecked abuse of power to darken their lives. The foundational principles of the Republic weren't just laws, but promises between citizens, promises of mutual respect, promises to watch over one another, and promises that they would each hold the responsibility to protect these new freedoms. Rome would not belong to a single ruler or even a single class of people. It would belong to all Romans, all who lived within its walls, those whose hands and voices would shape its future. From these principles came the idea of res publica, the public affair or public matter. It was a concept that turned every Roman citizen into a guardian of their government. For the first time, they were encouraged to speak out, to participate, to see themselves as essential parts of the great city they were building. This newfound responsibility was felt in the heart of every Roman. In markets, in homes, in assemblies, they were no longer subjects, they were citizens, and with that citizenship came the shared duty to protect the Republic. Among the most critical changes was the establishment of the Senate, a body that would become the very backbone of Roman governance. Here, the wisest and most experienced voices would come together, debating, disagreeing, but ultimately working toward decisions that would serve the Republic as a whole. The Senate was the collective wisdom of Rome, where debates would protect against the quick tempers and rash decisions that had once marked the rule of kings. It became a place where voices could clash, but ultimately where compromise, balance, and reason would prevail. The creation of the consuls, elected officials who would lead Rome, was the Republic's commitment to shared power. No longer would a single person sit upon a throne and dictate the lives of others. Now, two consuls would serve side by side, each holding equal power, each holding the responsibility to guide Rome, but also to check one another. They would serve for only a year, a reminder that power belonged to the people and could be withdrawn if misused. This system of checks and balances ensured that never again would a tyrant hold unchecked rule over their lives. The spirit of the Republic grew stronger with each new law, each new safeguard, as the people learned to navigate this uncharted territory of shared governance. They embraced the responsibility, feeling the weight of it, and recognizing the profound trust they had in one another. As each citizen cast their vote, attended assemblies, or witnessed the decisions of the Senate, they understood that they were part of something extraordinary. They were building a society that would stand for centuries, a legacy that would inspire future generations to seek freedom and justice above all else. In the coming days and years, the Republic became a living, breathing entity, fueled by the collective will and dedication of its people. It was not perfect, and it would face challenges, but the commitment to this shared power was unbreakable. Through triumphs and struggles, the spirit of the Republic endured, growing stronger with each test. The people felt pride knowing that they had moved beyond the pain of Lucretia's loss, turning her memory into the foundation of something beautiful, something that honored her sacrifice and her values. Rome was no longer ruled by fear, but by the trust its citizens placed in each other. They had built a government that would strive to reflect the ideals they held dearest: justice, honor, and the unwavering belief in the dignity of every citizen. These principles were the Republic's true rulers, guiding its people as they looked forward, shaping the future that Lucretia's sacrifice had inspired them to create. This was the birth of the Roman Republic, a beacon of freedom, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a tribute to a beloved figure whose memory would forever remind Rome of its commitment to honor, justice, and shared power. The Republic was more than a system, it was a promise, woven into the heart of every Roman, that they would always protect what they had built together, safeguarding it as a legacy for those yet to come. And so, with hearts full of pride, the people of Rome stepped forward into a future defined by their unity, their courage, and their relentless pursuit of justice. The fall of the monarchy left Rome standing at a precipice, a nation's spirit awakened and trembling, uncertain but ready to shape its own future. It was as if Rome herself drew in a collective breath, determined to set a foundation for freedom that no tyrant could ever shake. This was the heartbeat of a new era, and at its core was the creation of laws that would serve the people, protect the vulnerable, and establish a justice so fair that all Romans could finally feel secure in their own homeland. It wasn't just words or rules. These laws were the promises Rome was making to her people, a solemn vow that they would be treated with respect and honor. They had watched kings and nobility twist the law, bending it to fit their whims, leaving everyone else to suffer beneath a weight they had no voice in lifting. Now, that would change. Law would no longer be a weapon wielded by a few, it would be a shield, protecting each citizen equally, ensuring that power could never again go unchecked. For the first time, ordinary Romans, farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, mothers, could look at these laws and know that they, too, had a voice in shaping them. The 12 tables, as they came to be known, were not written in secret chambers or whispered in backrooms. They were displayed in the open, carved on bronze tablets for every eye to see, so that no man, no woman, and no child would live in ignorance of their rights. The law was no longer some distant, mysterious force, it was a guide, a contract, a bond that the people of Rome made with each other. Imagine the feeling of reading those words etched in metal, knowing that they were more than commands, they were symbols of a new kind of freedom. They set limits not only on the actions of citizens but on the powerful, too. These rules declared that no one, regardless of wealth or family, was above the law. Fathers, brothers, and sons read the words together, realizing that these laws would be their shield. In homes across Rome, families spoke of the future with a newfound hope, a belief that this was no longer a land of fear, but of fairness. Even disputes that once brought bloodshed would now be settled in courts, with a respect for justice that replaced the chaos of revenge. This was not just an advancement in governance, it was a shift in the hearts of the people, teaching them to trust that wrongs could be righted without violence, that grievances could find solutions without the pain of war. It was a transformation that went far deeper than politics. It changed how neighbors saw each other, how families raised their children, how they respected their communities. And at the core of this system stood the Senate, not as a symbol of power, but as a symbol of duty. These men were not kings or tyrants, they were chosen by the people to be the caretakers of this newfound liberty. They were bound by an oath to protect Rome's spirit of fairness and equality. Their task was heavy, and they carried it with the weight of knowing that every decision they made would shape Rome's future, that their honor was woven into the lives of everyone who trusted them. 2 consuls, Rome's first true public servants, were given the responsibility to lead, but never alone. Each consul balanced the other's power, creating a structure where ambition and pride could never hold more weight than justice and duty. This was a Rome that would be governed not by whims, but by wisdom, a Rome where power would be shared and held accountable. The people watched these consuls lead with cautious respect, aware that they could be removed if they failed to serve the people's best interests. The creation of new roles and responsibilities extended far beyond the Senate and consuls, reaching down to ordinary citizens who now had roles in governance, who could challenge decisions they felt were unjust. The tribunes, advocates for the people, were given the power to stand up to the Senate and consuls when they felt the laws leaned against the common folk. These tribunes were the people's voice, a voice that could now be heard, loud and strong, even in the chambers of power. For the first time, farmers, soldiers, and workers had defenders in places that had once been reserved for the elite. With these new laws and systems, the people began to believe that they had power over their own destinies, a confidence that settled like peace in their hearts. They were no longer subjects, they were citizens, equal members of a shared society. Even in times of hardship, even when they disagreed, they had this foundation, this mutual respect bound by laws, and it made them strong. In fields and marketplaces, in homes and temples, Romans felt the change in the very air they breathed. They walked through the streets with pride, standing a little taller, with hope that stretched beyond the present moment, beyond their individual lives. This was the birth of a true republic, a living embodiment of unity, fairness, and strength. And each citizen, no matter how small their role, was a guardian of that republic, charged with protecting it as fiercely as they would protect their own family. Laws, once feared, became Rome's promise of peace, her commitment to fairness, her shield for the future. In them, every Roman could see the values that would carry them forward: honor, justice, and an unbreakable dedication to each other. These were the stones upon which Rome would stand, and they were as strong as the people who believed in them. This new system of governance wasn't just words on tablets or rules in books. It was the soul of a people who had been born in the shadow of kings and emerged into the light of freedom, determined to defend that freedom for all who came after them. With each law, each safeguard, they were crafting a legacy that would carry the hopes of every Roman yet unborn. And in that legacy, and every word etched on those 12 tables, they found the strength to build not only a new government, but a new way of life, a life governed by honor, dignity, and respect for one another. The story of Lucretia became the heartbeat of Rome, her name echoing through the minds of its people, each syllable a reminder of courage, honor, and the price of freedom. Her life and tragic end etched a memory so strong, it wasn't just remembered, it was woven into Rome itself, transforming her spirit into an ideal that lifted up generations. For Romans, Lucretia was more than a woman, she was the symbol of a steadfast resolve, a reminder that dignity could never be stolen, even when everything else was stripped away. Mothers spoke of her as they tucked their children into bed, whispering her name like a shield, passing her memory down as a treasure and a guide. Lucretia represented virtue in its truest form, not merely in her loyalty or chastity, but in the way she held to her integrity until her last breath. Her pain, her courage, and her decision to demand justice reverberated in the hearts of those who came after her, inspiring an unbreakable devotion to truth. Young women looked to Lucretia's memory as an ideal, someone who had shown them that strength was not loud or boastful but quiet and resolute. She was an emblem of a virtue so strong it could stand in the face of terror. Her courage was not born of pride but of the belief that every person has the right to be respected. In the softness of her kindness, they saw a bravery that could withstand the cruelty of the world. Her legacy gave them a model of dignity that transcended words. It was felt deeply, a quiet strength that took root in their own hearts, teaching them that resilience could also be graceful. Men, too, saw in Lucretia a model for a different kind of honor. She showed them that honor was not about power or wealth, but about how one held to their values when no one else was watching. In Lucretia's story, they found a standard that could not be measured in victories or triumphs, but in humility and honesty. Her memory became a compass, guiding them to protect, to respect, to uphold the dignity of all those they loved. They saw that true strength lay not in domination, but in the resolve to do what was right, regardless of the cost. Lucretia's memory stirred something unshakable in the hearts of Rome's people, sparking a fire that would not fade. Each time they spoke her name, it was as if they were keeping a promise to her, a promise that no tyranny, no act of cruelty, would ever be tolerated again. She had sacrificed everything so that Rome could be free, and in her honor, they were willing to protect that freedom with their own lives. Every time a Roman passed by the place where she had once lived, they would slow, casting their gaze downward, and remember the woman who had become their protector in spirit. Her story became a guiding myth, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was a strength within every Roman heart capable of rising above fear and oppression. And so, Lucretia was not merely remembered, she was celebrated as an ideal that held their society together, a testament to the power of integrity and courage. In the streets, in the homes, in the public squares, her story was retold, each telling keeping her memory alive, binding the community together in their shared values. Children would sit wide-eyed as they heard about Lucretia's resolve, feeling their own small hearts beat with admiration and respect, even if they didn't yet understand the full weight of her choice. They only knew that Lucretia was someone to be honored, someone whose life showed them that goodness was always worth fighting for. Lucretia's influence shaped the very foundation of the Roman Republic. Her memory inspired Rome's leaders to govern with justice, humility, and a sense of accountability. They knew they could never let power blind them to the pain of their people, for they carried the weight of her sacrifice. Lucretia had died so that Rome could be born again in freedom, and that responsibility fell on their shoulders, urging them always to remember the price of true liberty. When Rome gathered for ceremonies, her name would often be spoken, a silent reminder to those in power that they served the people. They would feel the weight of her memory pressing down on them, urging them to uphold justice and keep corruption at bay. Her story, they understood, was not just a tale of personal tragedy but a story of transformation, a story that demanded they create a Rome where every citizen could live without fear. Even long after, when the memory of her actual life might have faded, Lucretia's name became a word synonymous with valor and righteousness, like a star that guided Rome through the uncertain darkness of its history. Her spirit lived in the laws that promised dignity to all, in the hearts of citizens who dared to dream of freedom, and in the hands of leaders who felt the weight of their duty to protect Rome. Her story was a torch passed from one generation to the next, lighting the way and showing that love for honor and justice could overcome any cruelty. In times of hardship, when challenges seemed insurmountable, Romans would think of Lucretia, remembering that they came from a line of people who had known both suffering and sacrifice, and who had chosen honor above all else. Lucretia's memory became a collective strength, a steady reminder that, despite the darkness, there was always a path forward, a path lit by courage, dignity, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. And in that memory, Lucretia would live on, forever a guardian of Rome's soul, forever a symbol of the strength that lies in choosing what is right. Her story broke the silence of centuries, reverberating through the ages, captured in strokes of paint, in inked pages, and in the voices of actors on distant stages. Lucretia's tale was one of sorrow and defiance, a story so human and yet so divine that it called to artists, writers, and dramatists, all drawn to preserve the memory of her strength and sacrifice. Through each artwork, each verse, and every scene, she was brought to life once again, her legacy reshaping itself, whispering reminders of courage to those who would experience her story. In the glow of candlelit rooms, Renaissance artists dedicated themselves to capturing Lucretia's final moments, her sorrow and strength portrayed with such care and reverence. They painted her with expressions so profound, her silent gaze became louder than any words. Her eyes, often cast downward in sadness yet filled with a quiet defiance, told of an inner torment that resonated with all who looked upon her. Artists knew that Lucretia was more than just a subject, she was a symbol. In her hand, they sometimes painted a dagger, stark and sharp, embodying the weight of her decision, and in every stroke, they aimed to capture the piercing reality of honor and the depths of sacrifice. In poetry, Lucretia's story was retold in stanzas that cried out her tragedy, and verses that immortalized her virtues. Poets found in her a muse who could carry the weight of their words to the hearts of the people. Lucretia's life and death were described in such vivid detail that readers felt her grief, understood her silence, and mourned her loss as if it were their own. The poets gave her voice back to her, allowing her to speak to all who would listen, to impart the depth of her love for her family and her dedication to her honor. Her story took form in epics and elegies, sometimes as soft as a whispered prayer, other times as fierce as a battle cry. The written word became her haven, and her spirit lived in the lines that reverberated across time. Playwrights brought Lucretia to life on stage, her pain and valor illuminated beneath flickering torches. Actors, draped in simple, timeless robes, gave flesh and blood to her story. The audience watched, often holding their breath, as Lucretia's character spoke with a voice so full of anguish that it struck a raw chord in their hearts. When she moved, they felt the weight of each step, understanding that her path was one of both suffering and salvation. Her final moments on stage, so tender and resolute, were performed with a solemnity that left viewers in silence. Many wept openly, unable to hold back the tears for a woman whose story, though centuries old, felt as real as their own struggles, their own losses. Lucretia became a reminder that in the face of profound darkness, one's spirit could still burn bright, offering light to others. Even in sculpture, she was immortalized, her form chiseled with painstaking precision, her face carved with expressions of both sorrow and strength. Sculptors worked diligently to capture the essence of her sacrifice in cold stone, crafting her likeness so that she would remain ageless, her story forever preserved. The smooth marble seemed almost warm to the touch, as if it contained the very heartbeat of Lucretia herself. Artists sought to show not just her beauty but the inner dignity that made her unforgettable. In each curl of her hair, in the graceful tilt of her head, and in the tension of her figure, they captured her bravery, a woman standing tall in the midst of injustice, her honor her only shield. Literary scholars interpreted Lucretia's story over and over, and in doing so, her character became a canvas onto which society projected its highest ideals. She was depicted as the ultimate martyr for justice, a figure so timeless that she came to represent the universal struggle for dignity. Writers used her to explore the struggles between personal honor and societal demands, using her story to ask the difficult questions: what does it mean to live with integrity? To what lengths will a person go to protect their honor? For generations, Lucretia's tale became the backbone of philosophical discussions, an icon that transcended her story and became a symbol of resistance, of self-respect, and of sacrifice for something far greater than oneself. As centuries passed, each artist, each writer, each performer added new depth to her story, layering interpretations upon interpretations. Lucretia was seen as a saint, as a warrior, as an emblem of purity and defiance. Her spirit was honored not only in Rome but across cultures, as societies found in her story a reflection of their own ideals. Her legacy became a bridge across time, linking generations in the shared belief that honor and dignity could, and should, outlast any earthly power. She reminded them that even in the face of despair, there was a choice to be made, and in making that choice, one could change the world. Every retelling, every brushstroke, every carved statue, was a tribute, a testament to the power of her legacy. Lucretia had become more than a figure of tragedy, she was an eternal symbol of moral courage, her memory cherished by those who saw in her the embodiment of the human spirit's resilience. And so, she lived on, her image reaching across ages, her story whispered in classrooms, in galleries, in theaters, wherever people gathered to remember those who had gone before them, those whose lives inspired change, and those who, like Lucretia, gave their all for the honor they held dear. She became the heartbeat of a nation, a name that every Roman knew and revered, and a memory that lingered in every home and on every street. Lucretia's story was not just one of personal tragedy but a legend that touched the very essence of Roman society. Her life, and her tragic end, etched itself into the soul of Rome, molding ideals of virtue and honor for generations to come. Each time her name was spoken, it was as though Rome was reminded of its values, of the depth of character that held a society together. In the world of Roman women, Lucretia became the ultimate figure of strength and chastity, embodying qualities that the culture so deeply respected. Women found in her an ideal of virtue, a guiding light in a world where the expectations placed on them were relentless. In Lucretia's story, they saw a figure who faced unimaginable suffering with courage, who put her family and her honor before herself, and who became a symbol of purity and sacrifice. In a society that so prized the virtues of loyalty and restraint, Lucretia became a mirror to every Roman woman, a reminder that true strength lay not in power but in the unyielding dignity of one's character. Men, too, held Lucretia's memory with the deepest respect, seeing her as an emblem of honor that demanded their own loyalty and duty. Her story was told as a lesson in virtue, echoing in the hearts of sons and fathers. She became a standard against which men measured their own integrity, her sacrifice a reminder of what honor and decency truly meant. Roman men held her as a beacon, an example that even in the face of injustice, one's principles were worth every sacrifice. Her memory shaped the ideals that young Roman boys grew up with, giving them a hero who demanded not might or conquest, but honor and fidelity. Across the Roman Republic, stories of Lucretia were told at family gatherings, discussed among the elders, and retold in the forums where the pulse of Roman life beat strongest. Her tale was as important as any legend of gods or goddesses, a story not of divine miracles but of human strength and dignity. Every Roman, whether a citizen or a senator, felt a connection to her, sensing that through her actions she had elevated the moral fabric of Rome itself. In her story, they saw a model of justice, of a soul willing to suffer to expose corruption and tyranny. In this way, Lucretia was not just a woman, they saw her as a spirit who belonged to all of Rome, a voice that demanded honesty from every part of society. Festivals were held in her honor, celebrations not of her death but of the legacy she left behind. Romans commemorated her life, retelling the way she had awakened Rome to the ideals that would lead to the birth of the Republic. Her story, whispered among families, was celebrated as a reminder of resilience, a call to honor and to selflessness that became woven into the customs and daily life of Rome. Her legacy was not only about remembering her courage, but about embodying it. Through public speeches, through art and theater, and through songs sung at gatherings, the memory of Lucretia was kept alive as if she had never left. Even the laws and codes that governed Roman life bore traces of her influence. Leaders and lawmakers looked to her story as a reminder of justice, crafting legislation that sought to preserve the dignity of each Roman citizen. In the courts and senate halls, the values she represented were invoked as a sacred duty to Rome. Her memory was there, a silent witness to every vow of duty, her story echoing in the minds of those who shaped the laws and held the reins of power. Lucretia had shown the price of tyranny, and in her name, Romans vowed to build a society where the people's honor and rights were guarded with the utmost respect. Generations grew up in the shadow of Lucretia's sacrifice, holding her story close to their hearts, learning from her how to live with honor and how to fight against injustice. In the quiet hours of the night, mothers would whisper her story to their daughters, fathers would tell it to their sons, and friends would speak of her as if she were one of their own. Lucretia became more than history, she became a legend, a timeless reminder that courage was found in sacrifice, that honor was worth any cost. Through every corner of Roman life, her memory lingered. People looked to Lucretia as a soul who had defied cruelty, whose strength had forced a mighty nation to confront its own values. Her life became a symbol that taught all Romans to hold to their virtues no matter the hardship. In her, they found a hero who reminded them of the purity of purpose, a guiding light that would lead the way for centuries, urging them never to abandon the ideals that held Rome together. Centuries after her tragic death, Lucretia's story reached across time to find new life in the hearts of Renaissance thinkers and Enlightenment visionaries, her tale of honor and sacrifice inspiring those who sought truth, justice, and a better world. Her courage was not forgotten. Her memory became a beacon that guided the minds of poets, artists, philosophers, and reformers, and through her example, they found the courage to confront corruption and uphold integrity. In the Renaissance, when the human spirit was reaching for light after the Dark Ages, artists and writers were captivated by Lucretia's resilience. Her story was a blend of beauty and sorrow, a tribute to the strength of a woman who would not bend, even in the face of unbearable cruelty. Painters captured her in moments of defiance or in her last moments, the purity of her spirit radiating from their canvases. The image of Lucretia with a dagger, eyes filled with unshakable resolve, moved those who looked upon it to see more than just a tragic end. It became a symbol of sacrifice, a stand for personal integrity against the weight of oppression. The Renaissance embraced her as an icon of moral clarity, a figure of classical virtue that seemed to embody the era's longing for wisdom and renewal. Writers spoke of her as a woman who represented more than her time, more than Rome, her story now standing for anyone who struggled for justice. The values of the ancient world, the idea of living by unwavering principles, felt alive in her story. Through her, Renaissance thinkers found proof that true heroism lay not in grand battles or royal lineages, but in the soul's ability to stay pure, even when surrounded by darkness. As the Renaissance gave way to the Enlightenment, Lucretia's legacy grew even more profound. Her sacrifice now spoke directly to those who questioned authority and demanded liberty. She became a figure of rebellion, a symbol of the people's rights against tyranny. Political thinkers and philosophers began to see her as a model for societal reform, a woman whose resistance, even in death, had ignited a fire that burned for generations. She represented the courage to face power without fear, to uphold one's dignity in the face of oppression, and to inspire others to fight for freedom and equality. Enlightenment thinkers held Lucretia's story close, finding in it a powerful message that no throne, no monarch, no institution could stand against the moral strength of a person who knew what was right. Her sacrifice became part of a larger narrative on the rights of individuals and the moral responsibility of leaders. She was a silent advocate for republicanism and the ideals of shared governance, her memory whispering that no ruler should hold power without the trust and respect of their people. In the writings of Enlightenment philosophers, Lucretia emerged as a symbol of the social contract. Her death became a rallying point, a call to build societies on principles of honor, justice, and accountability. Her influence was felt in discussions of democracy, justice, and equality, as philosophers used her story to argue that a society should honor its people, protecting them from harm and giving them the rights they deserved. Through Lucretia, they saw the stark consequences of tyranny, the price of a leader's betrayal of trust, and the painful cost that society must pay when it allows power to corrupt. In the art and literature of the Enlightenment, Lucretia's figure rose yet again, her story told and retold, always reminding audiences of her valor. Her image adorned sculptures and paintings, her story echoed in poetry and plays. She became a muse for artists who sought to capture the dignity of the human spirit. As viewers stood before paintings of Lucretia with her final act of self-sacrifice immortalized on the canvas, they were moved to reflect on the value of integrity, the cost of oppression, and the unbreakable bond between honor and freedom. Her story inspired compassion, respect, and an unwavering belief that each person held a responsibility to uphold justice. Even as time passed, Lucretia's influence did not fade. She lived on as a symbol for those who sought reform, her story a reminder that true change required courage, that to rise against wrong, one must hold to what is right with unyielding conviction. For those who read her tale or saw her image, she became more than a figure from history, she became a call to action, a reminder that the world needed people of principle. Her influence helped shape a vision of society where dignity mattered, where honor was the standard, and where every person was responsible for the justice and goodness of the world they lived in. The tale of Lucretia gave strength to generations, her legacy woven into the ideals that would birth democracies and shape revolutions. Through her story, the Renaissance found its muse, and the Enlightenment found its conscience. She was the symbol of a timeless struggle, a reminder that while power can corrupt, the human spirit has the strength to confront and even overcome it. As long as there were those willing to fight for honor, justice, and truth, Lucretia's influence would live on, her story an eternal testament to the resilience of the human soul. Lucretia's story still resonates powerfully in our world, her voice reaching us across centuries with unyielding emotion. Contemporary artists, scholars, and thinkers look at her story with awe, reverence, and a haunting sorrow. They feel her pain, her dignity, her courage, and they find themselves compelled to reinterpret her tragedy in ways that speak to modern struggles for justice and equality. They do not merely tell her story, they feel it, and in doing so, they help us see Lucretia in our own time, a symbol of human resilience and moral fortitude. Artists see Lucretia as a beacon of untarnished virtue standing against corruption, and in her they find inspiration to address issues that echo hers, the fight for justice, the pain of betrayal, the importance of courage. They paint, sculpt, and write about Lucretia with an intensity that brings her anguish and honor to life. Her image appears in powerful portraits, often showing her in the moments before or after her final act, a figure of both vulnerability and unbreakable strength. In these modern interpretations, her gaze holds both sorrow and determination, urging us to feel her pain and yet rise with her resilience. Each brushstroke, each line, is filled with empathy, as though the artists themselves are standing beside her, witnessing her suffering, and sharing in her profound courage. Poets, too, find Lucretia's story painfully relevant. They describe her as a woman who speaks for those who cannot, who bears a wound that echoes through time. Her story becomes a metaphor for the harm inflicted by power and the enduring strength of those who endure. Each line they write seems like a heartbeat, each word a pulse of sorrow and resolve. In verse, Lucretia becomes a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of resistance, urging readers to rise against oppression, to hold firm in the face of adversity. The poets capture her as a soul who was wronged yet stands tall, her suffering transformed into an anthem for justice. In theater, Lucretia's story is reenacted with intensity, her character portrayed with raw emotion that fills the stage with her pain and defiance. Audiences watch, gripped, as the actress embodies her sorrow, her strength, her unbreakable spirit. They see her as a person, not a myth, someone who feels as they feel, who loves as they love, and who hurts as they hurt. The stage becomes a space where Lucretia's memory comes alive, her story a mirror for the audience's own fears, hopes, and dreams for a fairer world. Each gesture, each spoken line, is filled with a powerful message, an emotional truth that resonates with every person in the room. Historians approach Lucretia with both reverence and curiosity, eager to understand not only the events of her life but the values she represents. They see her as more than a tragic figure, they recognize her as a symbol of a changing world. Her story, they find, is not just one of personal tragedy but one that marks a societal turning point. She becomes a figure who challenges the power structures of her time, an emblem of resistance that speaks to modern movements for change. They write about her with respect and empathy, piecing together her story with care and highlighting her as a figure who continues to inspire those who fight for justice and equality. Contemporary feminist thinkers look to Lucretia as a complex figure who embodies both vulnerability and extraordinary power. They see her as someone who refused to let her dignity be taken from her, who chose to speak out even in her last moments, setting a legacy that challenges all forms of oppression. Lucretia, to them, is a woman whose voice transcends time, inspiring others to find their own voices in the face of injustice. She represents the strength within all who suffer and yet stand tall, refusing to be defined by what was taken from them. In her, they find a rallying cry, a reminder of the power of standing firm and speaking out. Social justice advocates, too, find Lucretia's story profoundly relevant. They look at her as a symbol of all who have been wronged and silenced by the powerful. Her story, they say, is not just ancient history but a modern tragedy, repeating itself in the lives of those who face oppression and abuse. Lucretia's courage becomes a symbol of resistance, her memory urging people to hold those in power accountable. She becomes a reminder of the cost of silence and the importance of action, inspiring movements that demand respect, justice, and dignity for all. For them, Lucretia is not a distant figure from a different era, she is a voice that lives on, her story is urgent now as it was then. In literature, writers find endless inspiration in Lucretia's tale, reimagining her story in ways that make it resonate with the issues of today. She becomes a character who confronts injustice, a heroine who refuses to yield, even when faced with unthinkable betrayal. Writers depict her as a figure who understands both pain and power, someone whose suffering speaks to the human condition, whose bravery inspires those who face their own battles. She becomes a symbol of resilience, of the human spirit's ability to withstand even the darkest trials and emerge with dignity intact. Through their words, readers find themselves moved by Lucretia, feeling her sorrow, her strength, her unwavering sense of honor. In the classroom, students learn about Lucretia's story as more than just an ancient tale. They see her as a figure who speaks to issues that are still very much alive. They see her as a woman who chose dignity over despair, whose actions changed the course of history. They discuss her story, debating what it means to live with honor, what it means to face injustice. Lucretia's story becomes a lesson not just in history but in humanity, an example of courage and sacrifice that resonates with each generation. And so, in the hands of contemporary scholars and artists, Lucretia's story finds new life. Her memory becomes a shared inheritance, a call to resist the wrongs of the world with courage and integrity. Whether through art, literature, theater, or scholarship, each interpretation brings us closer to her spirit, her pain, and her strength. Her story, told and retold, continues to remind us of the power of resilience, the beauty of honor, and the courage to stand for what is right. Through these modern retellings, Lucretia lives on, her voice a timeless echo, her story an eternal testament to the strength of the human soul. It's impossible to hear Lucretia's story and not feel the weight of her suffering, the power of her bravery, and the tragedy of her choice. Her story isn't just about a single act of courage or the heartbreak of betrayal, it's a story that touches on the most profound questions of dignity, integrity, and the strength to stand up for what is right. Lucretia's life leaves us with lessons so deep and moving that they speak to our own lives, inviting us to reflect on what it means to hold on to one's principles, no matter the cost. Her story holds a powerful mirror to the weight of honor. Faced with a devastating betrayal, Lucretia could have kept silent, letting the shame of what had happened to her slowly eat away at her spirit. Yet she chose not to. She chose to speak, to let her family and her people know what had been done to her, to be seen as a symbol of injustice rather than a silent victim. In her choice, we find a lesson about integrity and honesty. Lucretia's tragedy shows us the courage it takes to face the truth, even when that truth is unbearable. Her choice reminds us that silence, while easier, can sometimes be the heaviest burden of all, that speaking out is often the only way to stand tall. In her story, we find a powerful lesson about the boundaries we draw to protect our inner selves. Lucretia faced a terrible violation, an act meant to shatter her sense of self. But she held on to her dignity and, even in her suffering, refused to be defined by the cruelty of another. Her strength lies not in how the world saw her, but in how she saw herself. This lesson on personal dignity, the strength to preserve one's inner sense of worth no matter what happens on the outside, inspires anyone who has faced hardship or injustice. Lucretia shows us that dignity is something we hold within ourselves, that no one can take away our self-worth if we hold it fiercely in our hearts. Another lesson from Lucretia's tragedy speaks to the very core of human resilience. Betrayed by someone in a position of power, she was left with her trust shattered and her sense of safety destroyed. But in this pain, Lucretia found the strength to act, to reclaim her story, and to make a choice that would not only mark her own life but change the course of history. Her tragedy shows us that resilience isn't just about surviving but about holding on to who we are through life's hardest moments. Even as she felt broken, she didn't let go of her sense of right and wrong, her love for her family, or her loyalty to her community. Lucretia's story reminds us that resilience is sometimes quieter and more heartbreaking than we realize, that it's not always about overcoming but about standing firm in who we are. Her story brings a hard, necessary lesson about the abuse of power. Tarquin's crime was not just against Lucretia but against the very fabric of trust, respect, and honor that holds a society together. His act was a reminder of what happens when those in power put their desires above the rights and dignity of others. Lucretia's tragedy teaches us to be vigilant, to recognize the terrible cost when authority is abused, and to understand that power must be tempered with respect for others. Her story serves as a timeless reminder that no one, regardless of their status, is above the moral laws that bind us all together. It urges us to demand accountability and justice, to stand against those who would misuse their power at the expense of others. And through Lucretia's tragic decision, we are reminded of the lengths to which one may go to protect a legacy of honor. Her death was an act of defiance, a choice to preserve her values even when life no longer offered peace. It was her way of saying that her integrity was worth more than her own existence. While this choice is heartbreakingly extreme, it serves as a powerful lesson about the value of one's principles. Lucretia's legacy is a testament to the idea that honor, once lost, can be almost impossible to reclaim, and that protecting it can be a matter of utmost importance. She shows us that some things, dignity, truth, and respect, are worth protecting even at the highest cost. Her story also speaks to the transformative power of courage and how one person's brave act can stir others to action. Lucretia's decision ignited a revolution. Her tragedy sparked a fire within her people, a fire that led to the overthrow of the monarchy and the birth of the Roman Republic. Through her, we see how one person's stand can awaken others, how courage can ripple outward, changing lives and even entire societies. Lucretia's story becomes more than just a personal tragedy. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest changes come from the deepest wounds, that courage in the face of suffering can inspire movements, revolutions, and the drive for justice. Lucretia's story leaves us with a lesson about remembrance, about honoring those who have suffered by carrying forward their memory. Her people didn't just mourn her, they immortalized her, ensuring that her story would be told for generations to come. This act of collective memory serves as a way of honoring not only her suffering but also her strength and her values. It reminds us of the importance of remembering those who have fought, suffered, and sacrificed, of keeping their stories alive so that we, too, might draw strength from them. Lucretia's memory becomes a call to action, a symbol of the fight against injustice that lives on long after she is gone. In Lucretia's life and tragic end, we find the resilience of the human spirit, the power of truth, and the courage to face even the darkest trials with dignity. Her story is a profound reminder that even in the face of betrayal, we hold within us the power to shape our legacy. Lucretia's choices resonate across time, teaching us about the strength that lies within each of us, the values that define us, and the unbreakable resolve to stand up for what is right. Her legacy is not just a reflection of her own courage, but a beacon of hope for all who follow in her footsteps, urging us to live with honor, to protect our dignity, and to believe that justice, though sometimes delayed, is worth every sacrifice. Lucretia's story pulses with a timeless force, her legacy rippling far beyond her own life, echoing through Roman history and into the hearts of people across centuries. Her name, forever etched in the pages of history, has come to stand as a symbol of purity, strength, and resistance against oppression. The tragedy of Lucretia, wrapped in both myth and reality, strikes a chord so deeply rooted in the human spirit that it continues to shape ideals and inspire movements even today. In her story, Lucretia's sacrifice wasn't merely personal, it was a call that shook the entire structure of Roman society. Her courage became the heartbeat of a revolution. What she endured became the spark that set ablaze a new era of justice, where rulers would no longer be unchecked, and where the value of a person's honor could no longer be trampled by those in power. The people of Rome took her suffering to heart, using it as a rallying cry to overthrow a tyrannical monarchy and, from its ashes, build a republic grounded in the principles of law, duty, and respect for the individual. As her name passed down through generations, Lucretia became more than a memory, she transformed into a legend. The details of her life and death blurred into a narrative woven with symbols and ideals, reflecting not just the woman she was, but also the powerful moral vision she inspired. For Romans, Lucretia was the embodiment of chastity, honor, and sacrifice, a paragon of virtue who chose to face the ultimate tragedy rather than live with dishonor. Her story inspired them to believe that integrity could be preserved even when everything else was taken away, that a single act of courage could become the foundation for a whole society's values. With every retelling, Lucretia's story grew, taking on a life of its own. Artists, poets, and historians found in her a muse who spoke to the very essence of human dignity and resilience. In literature and art, her image was immortalized, her sacrifice rendered in strokes of paint and ink, reminding the world of the strength found in vulnerability. Lucretia's myth grew alongside the Roman Republic, entwining with its political philosophy, its public ideals, and its understanding of honor. Her spirit seeped into the very fabric of Roman identity, shaping cultural norms that would define the empire for centuries. But Lucretia's legacy did not stop at the borders of Rome. Her story carried through the Renaissance, where artists and writers looked to her as a symbol of resistance to tyranny, purity, and the unyielding power of personal honor. The Renaissance thinkers, captivated by her narrative, saw in her story a timeless truth about humanity and justice. Her tale resonated with their quest to revive ancient ideals and build a world that honored both the strength and dignity of the human spirit. Lucretia became a muse once again, her story reinterpreted to reflect the dreams and ideals of each new generation. Her tragedy, both heartbreaking and empowering, inspired philosophers, writers, and revolutionaries alike, awakening in them a fierce desire to uphold truth and justice in their own societies. Through the Enlightenment, Lucretia continued to be a touchstone for thinkers who believed in the sanctity of the individual and the importance of personal freedom. To these philosophers, her story was an argument against the unchecked power of rulers and the importance of moral integrity. Lucretia's narrative fueled their calls for justice and freedom, for systems that would protect people from the abuse of authority. Her spirit was a quiet yet insistent voice, calling for a world where individuals were not just subjects under a crown but people with rights, dignity, and a voice. Even as centuries passed, Lucretia remained a symbol of defiance against oppression, a timeless representation of the battle between power and the powerless. The myth of Lucretia grew, layered with interpretations and meanings as each era grappled with its own struggles and ideals. In her, people found the strength to face injustices in their own lives, a reminder that courage could live on long after a single lifetime. She showed that sacrifice for one's values can resonate across generations, inspiring people who may not even know her name to act with honor, to defend the oppressed, and to strive for a society grounded in justice. In every retelling, Lucretia's image became more vivid, her voice more powerful, calling for a world where integrity and courage matter more than titles or power. Yet, beneath the layers of myth, there was also the woman herself, Lucretia, a person who lived and breathed, whose pain and suffering were real, and whose courage was born from a raw, human desire for dignity. Her story reminds us of the fragile line between myth and reality, of how real pain and real courage can shape history just as powerfully as grand victories and battles. In her decision, we see a person willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of honor, even if it meant surrendering her own life. Lucretia's humanity is what makes her legend so moving. It's the reality of her struggle that gives her myth its enduring power. In remembering Lucretia, we remember the strength that lies within every person. Her story remains a testament to the idea that, even in moments of despair, there is a way to rise above suffering. It's a reminder that courage doesn't come without cost, and that sometimes the most profound battles are fought within the heart. Her legacy calls to each of us, asking us to look within ourselves for the strength to stand by our values, even when the odds are overwhelming. Lucretia's impact extends far beyond the annals of Roman history. It touches the core of what it means to be human. In her story, we find both a heartbreaking tragedy and an unbreakable resolve. Her tale stands as a reminder that we are all connected through our shared struggles for dignity, that each of us has the power to inspire change, even if it begins in the darkest of places. Through her, we are reminded of the profound beauty of courage, the transformative power of honor, and the enduring legacy of a single, unyielding act of defiance.